At the Phoenix bus terminal, where Charles Smith's life was dwindling into destitution and loneliness in his old age, a shocking truth is about to be revealed, not only changing his destiny forever, but also redefining the meaning of a true story about family. In just 2 weeks, a 65-year-old man, once merely a quiet shoe repairman, is about to become the legal guardian of 3 abandoned little girls, and that act of kindness will plunge him into a fierce legal battle where threats from the past and astounding truths about the girls' origins will lurk, ready to destroy everything. Can love and courage stand against a world full of injustice, or will old age and vulnerability cause him to lose this unexpected family? The Phoenix bus terminal was wrapping up its day with its usual symphony of rumbling engines, garbled announcements over the PA, and the endless murmur of travelers. Amidst this organized chaos, Unit 23 stood as a relic from another era. A faded sign announced, "Smith's Shoes, guaranteed repairs." The man inside, carrying his 65 years like a worn backpack, was putting the final stitches on a pair of cowboy boots. Mr. Charles Smith adjusted his spectacles on the bridge of his nose and squinted. His hands, calloused by 4 decades of skilled craftsmanship, moved with the precision of someone who had elevated a trade into an art. The wall clock, another survivor of time's relentless march, read 8:47 p.m. "Excuse me, Mr. Smith," the voice of Miss Dolores, the hot dog vendor from the stand across the way, broke his concentration. "I'm heading out. You sure you don't want me to leave you some hot dogs?" Today's batch turned out mighty tasty. Charles looked up and offered a tired smile. "Thanks, Dolores, but I'm not very hungry today." The woman frowned, placing her hands on her hips, making the numerous bracelets adorning her wrists jingle. "Charles Smith, you've been singing that same tune all week. One of these days you're going to disappear, and all that'll be left is your apron floating in the air." The shoemaker chuckled softly. Dolores was the only person who could coax a genuine smile from him these days. "Tomorrow, I promise. Tomorrow I'll eat 3 of those chili dogs." The woman shook her head but finally gave in. "All right, you stubborn old man, get some rest." As Dolores walked away, Charles sighed deeply. The familiar weight of his solitary life pressed down on him. He eyed the crumpled letter peeking from beneath his toolbox, the 3rd late rent notice for his shop. Mr. Johnson, the property manager, had been clear. "1 more week, and I'll have to ask you to vacate, Mr. Smith. Times are changing, and there are businesses willing to pay more for this space." Times are changing. That phrase haunted him like a ghost. As he put away his tools in his old leather briefcase, his eyes fell on the framed photograph on his workbench. Eleanor and him 40 years ago, the day they opened the shoe repair shop. She was in her floral dress, and he had that mustache she always insisted made him look like a movie star. "We're going to build something that lasts, Charles," she had told him that day. And it had lasted until Eleanor left, taking half his heart and all the laughter from the shop with her. 5 years now without her, and the shoe repair shop, like himself, seemed to be slowly withering. Thunder rumbled in the distance, announcing the storm the news had predicted. Charles hurried to finish up, wishing to get to his small room in the back before the rain intensified. That's when he heard it, a choked sob, almost imperceptible amidst the terminal's emptying bustle. He strained his ears, thinking he might have imagined it. But there it was again, coming from a dark corner where old boxes and packing materials were piled. "Is anyone there?" he asked, approaching cautiously. Silence was his only answer. Moved by a curiosity he didn't quite understand, Charles pushed aside some boxes, and then he saw them, 3 girls huddled in the darkness. The oldest, about 11 years old, looked at him with a defensive fierceness that contrasted with the fear in her dark eyes. She protectively hugged a girl of about 8, who was visibly trembling. The smallest, no more than 4, slept restlessly on a worn backpack. "What are you doing here, girls? Where are your parents?" Charles asked, adjusting his glasses to see them better in the dim light. The oldest kept her defiant eyes fixed on him without responding. It was the middle girl who spoke, her voice so soft that Charles had to lean in to hear her. "Our dad said he'd come back, that we should wait for him here. And when was that?" The shoemaker asked, a grim suspicion forming in his mind even before the answer came. The little one looked at her older sister as if asking for permission to speak. Finally, it was the oldest who responded, her voice surprisingly firm for someone so young. "Yesterday, he said he was just going to buy tickets to Los Angeles and that he'd come back for us." The girls didn't know his full name, only Dad or sometimes Robert, the name Emily had once heard him use when speaking to someone on the phone. At that moment, the youngest girl woke up, her enormous eyes, still clouded with sleep, fixed on Charles with that innocent curiosity typical of children who haven't yet learned to distrust the world. "I'm hungry, Daisy," she murmured, rubbing her eyes with her tiny fists. Something in that little voice broke something inside the old shoemaker. He suddenly remembered the words Eleanor used to repeat in difficult times. "Sometimes, Charles, God puts you exactly where someone needs you." The rain began to fall heavily, drumming on the terminal's metal roof with a deafening rattle. Charles looked at the three girls, as vulnerable and abandoned as he had felt since Eleanor left. He made a decision that would change his life forever. "Come with me," he said, extending a calloused hand towards them. "I have a little food and a dry place where you can spend the night." The oldest, Sarah, he had heard, studied him with an intensity that seemed to pierce his soul. Her eyes, too old for her childish face, shifted from distrust to calculation, and finally to a resigned acceptance. "Just for tonight," she warned, standing up and helping her sisters do the same. "Tomorrow, our dad will come back for us." Charles nodded, though something in his heart told him that man would never return, and that rainy October night would mark a before and after in the history of Smith's shoes. As he guided the three little girls to the back room, which had been his home for the past 5 years, he couldn't help but think that perhaps, just perhaps, Eleanor was right. Perhaps this was why he was still there, persevering against all odds in a world that no longer seemed to have a place for shoemakers. The small room behind the shoe repair shop barely had space for Charles's single bed, a rickety table, and the hot plate where he prepared his simple meals. The girls observed the place with a mixture of caution and relief at finally being sheltered from the rain that now fell relentlessly on Phoenix. "It's not much," Charles apologized, "but it's dry and safe." As he heated the leftover chili and pulled the last hot dog buns from the bag, he noticed that the oldest girl watched his every move with vigilant eyes. The two younger ones, however, seemed too tired and hungry to keep their guard up. "What's your name?" the youngest suddenly asked, her big brown eyes fixed on him with childlike curiosity. "Charles," he replied, surprised by the direct question. "Charles Smith." "I'm Holly," the girl smiled, revealing a missing front tooth. "I'm 4 years old." She held up 4 little fingers to emphasize. "Holly, don't talk to," the oldest began, but the middle girl interrupted her. "I'm Emily," she said softly, "and she's Sarah, our older sister." Sarah shot a reproachful look at her sisters but said nothing more. When Charles placed the plates of chili and hot dogs in front of them, all three ate with an appetite that showed they hadn't had a decent meal in a long time. "Where are you from?" Charles asked, trying to break the tense silence that had fallen over the small room. "From Arizona," Emily replied after a moment. "From a town near Flagstaff." "Emily," Sarah's voice had a warning tone. "It's okay, Sarah," Emily insisted. "He's helping us." Charles sensed the dynamic between the sisters, Sarah, the distrustful protector, Emily, the peacemaker, and Holly, still oblivious to the gravity of their situation, trusting her older sisters to solve everything. "You can take my bed tonight," Charles offered. "I'll sleep on the floor." "You don't have to," Sarah began to protest, but the shoemaker was already pulling an old blanket from the small closet. "Insist," he said with gentle firmness. "You need a good rest. Tomorrow we'll see what to do." That night, as the three girls slept huddled in his bed, Charles remained awake on his makeshift bed on the floor. The rain continued to fall, and with each thunderclap, he felt Holly startle in her dreams. What was he getting himself into? At 65, with a business on the verge of bankruptcy and no family other than memories of Eleanor, how could he help 3 abandoned girls? And yet, as he watched their silhouettes in the dim light, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a purpose. Perhaps it was crazy. Perhaps tomorrow their father would appear. Perhaps everything would return to normal. But tonight, in the middle of the storm, Mr. Charles Smith was not alone, and that, he discovered with surprise, meant more than he could express in words. Outside, the rain began to subside, and with it, the last buses departed from the terminal, carrying travelers to unknown destinations. But within the quiet walls of Unit 23, something profound had shifted. For Charles and the three abandoned girls, the night was not an end, but the unexpected beginning of a new chapter, woven together by a fragile thread of hope. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the small window of the back room when Charles woke up. For a moment, the pain in his back disoriented him until he remembered why he had slept on the floor. He slowly sat up and observed the bed where the three girls were still asleep, forming a small knot of intertwined arms and legs. Even in dreams, Sarah kept a protective arm over her sisters. The morning light revealed details that the night had hidden: their worn but clean clothes, Emily's carefully braided hair, the small string bracelets on Holly's wrists. Someone had loved them, there was no doubt about that. With silent movements, Charles put water on to boil on the hot plate. He didn't have much to offer for breakfast, just a little coffee for himself and some crackers. He would have to go out and buy something more substantial. "Good morning." Emily's voice startled him. The girl was watching him from the bed, her big dark eyes still sleepy. "Good morning," Charles replied softly. "Did you sleep well?" Emily nodded, carefully sitting up so as not to wake her sisters. "I'm going out for a moment to buy some breakfast," Charles explained. "Will you be okay if I leave you alone for a few minutes?" The girl looked at him with a maturity that didn't match her age, reminding him of Eleanor, always the voice of calm. "Yes, Sarah usually sleeps a little longer when she can." "I won't be long," he promised, taking his old jacket from the coat rack. The terminal was already bustling with activity. The first buses arrived, loaded with sleepy travelers, while the shops began to open. Charles headed to the small annex market, where he found Miss Dolores already at her stand, preparing the dough for the day's hot dogs. "Mr. Smith, what a miracle to see you so early." "Good morning, Dolores." The woman looked at him suspiciously. "You look like you didn't sleep a wink." Charles hesitated for a moment. Dolores was a gossip, but also the most trustworthy person he knew. "I need your advice," he finally said, "and maybe a little help." In a few words, he explained the situation: the three girls, the father who hadn't returned, his offer of shelter. "Oh, Charles," she sighed when he finished, "always with a bigger heart than your wallet. What are you going to do with three little girls? You can barely support yourself." "It'll only be for a few days," he replied, though he didn't even believe his own words. Dolores shook her head but began wrapping several hot dogs in newspaper and added some fruit to the bag. "Here, for their breakfast. And take these fruits too. Those girls need vitamins. I'll pay you as soon as—" "Don't even mention it," she interrupted. "You pay me when you can." "But Charles," her expression turned serious, "be careful. If Mr. Johnson finds out you have girls living in the shop, it'll be another excuse to kick you out. And the state, well, you know how those things are." Upon returning to the shoe repair shop, he found the three girls awake. Sarah was standing by the window, arms crossed, with a watchful expression. Holly was playing with a small rag doll, while Emily had neatly made the bed. "I brought breakfast," he announced, placing the bag on the table. The girls looked at the hot dogs with obvious appetite, but Sarah didn't move from her position. "Have many buses passed already?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the window. Charles understood immediately. She was still waiting for her father. "Some," he replied carefully, "but the day is just beginning." As they ate breakfast, Charles watched Sarah break her hot dog into small pieces and serve her sisters first, making sure they had enough before eating herself. "Doesn't your wife eat breakfast with us?" Holly asked, looking around. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Emily nudged her sister. "Eleanor, my wife, passed away 5 years ago," Charles replied softly. Holly's eyes widened. "She went to heaven like our mummy." "Holly?" Sarah's voice had a warning tone, but Charles nodded. "Yes, like your mummy." "And you miss her a lot?" the little one continued, ignoring her sister's glances. "Every day," Charles confessed, "but I have her memories here." He pointed to his heart. "And that helps me." Holly seemed to ponder his words seriously. "I have Mummy here too, but sometimes I forget what her face looked like." Emily hugged her sister while Sarah lowered her gaze, hiding the damp sparkle in her eyes. A sharp knock on the shop door startled them all. "Smith, are you in there?" "Mister?" Johnson's deep voice made Charles jump up. "Stay here and don't make a sound," he whispered, heading towards the curtain that separated the back room. The property manager was already inside when Charles emerged, closing the curtain behind him. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson. How can I help you?" "Mr. Sala." William Johnson, a 50-year-old man with a neatly trimmed mustache and an elegant suit, looked at him suspiciously. "I've been informed there was unusual activity in your shop last night, and that you might be housing people here." Charles maintained a neutral expression, though he felt his stomach clench. "I don't know who told you that, Mr. Johnson. I live alone, as always." The manager scanned the shop, stopping at the dirty dishes Charles had forgotten to clear. "4 plates for 1 man," he observed. "Were you very hungry last night, Smith?" "Miss? Dolores brought me dinner. You know how she is, always worried because she says I'm too thin." Johnson didn't seem convinced, but nodded slowly. "I remind you that the contract is very clear. These premises are for business, not for living, and definitely not for housing third parties." He pulled an envelope from his jacket and placed it on the counter. "The final notice for payment. You have until Friday, or I'll have to ask you to vacate." When the manager left, Charles slumped onto his stool. Friday. Only 4 days to get money he didn't have. The curtain moved, and Sarah appeared, her expression a mix of worry and determination. "It's because of us, isn't it? You're in trouble for giving us shelter." "It's not your responsibility, Sarah," Charles replied. "You're children, and you needed help. Any decent person would have done the same." "No, not just anyone," she said with a certainty that made Charles wonder what experiences had led her to that conclusion. "We'll leave today. When Dad comes, we won't be bothering you anymore." Throughout the day, Sarah remained by the window, watching every arriving bus, every descending passenger. Charles saw hope in her eyes, followed by disappointment when none turned out to be her father. That cycle had repeated dozens of times, and each time something inside the old shoemaker's heart broke a little more. In the afternoon, while Charles worked on some boots, he noticed Emily watching his every move with fascination. "Interested in the trade?" he asked, surprised by the girl's attention. Emily nodded shyly. "I like watching you fix broken things. It's like magic." "It's not magic, it's practice. 40 years of doing the same thing gives you a certain skill." "Can I try?" she asked, pointing to a small piece of leather. To his surprise, Emily handled the tool with natural dexterity. Her small hands seemed to instinctively know how to move it. "Our mummy taught us how to knit," she explained as she worked. "Like the Native American crafts. She said the skilled ones work with their hands. Her name was Maria, and she was a Navajo artisan. She used to say her hands were simply extensions of her heart, weaving stories into every thread." "Your mother was Native American?" Emily nodded. "She was. Dad wasn't." They met when he came to sell crafts in the city. As they talked, she had begun to draw on the leather, tracing colorful geometric patterns typical of Native American art. At home, she had lots of colored threads. She taught us how to make bracelets, bead figures, to embroider on fabric. "You're very skilled," Charles commented, admiring the design. "You have natural talent." From the window, Sarah observed the scene. For a moment, she seemed about to join them, but then a bus stopped, and her attention returned to the passengers. At night, Dolores returned with a pot of chicken soup. After dinner, when the girls were already in bed, the woman sat next to Charles on the small bench. "So, what are you going to do?" she asked in a low voice. "I don't know," he confessed. "I don't have the money for the rent. And even if I did, Mr. Johnson wants to kick me out. And these girls, if the authorities find out, they'll take them to a shelter, they'll separate them. They're good girls, Dolores. They've been through a lot. They deserve to be together in a real home. And you think you can give them that? I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy for even considering it. I'm too old, too poor, but you have a heart, Charles Smith, and that's worth more than any wealth." Dolores stood up. "Besides, you're too old to change. You've always been a stubborn sentimentalist." After Dolores left, Charles went back into the room. The girls were asleep, except for Sarah, who was staring at the ceiling with wide eyes. "You should get some sleep," Charles suggested softly. "Tomorrow will be another day." "My dad's not coming back, is he?" The question came out as a broken whisper. Charles sat on the edge of the bed, choosing his words carefully. I don't know, Sarah, but if he doesn't come back, it's not because you did anything wrong. Sometimes adults make wrong decisions. A silent tear rolled down the girl's cheek. With an almost imperceptible gesture, Charles extended his wrinkled hand. After a moment of doubt, Sarah took it. What are we going to do now? Her voice barely audible. For now, rest, Charles replied. Tomorrow we'll think of something together. For the first time since he found them, Sarah didn't protest the idea of staying. As the girl finally closed her eyes, exhausted, Charles remained there holding her small hand, wondering how three strangers had so quickly entered a heart he thought was forever closed after Eleanor's departure. Outside, the last bus of the night departed, and with it, perhaps the last hopes of an impossible reunion. But in that small room behind the shoe repair shop, something new began to grow, a fragile trust that, like plants in arid ground, would need care and patience to flourish. 3 days had passed since that rainy night. The routine in the small shoe repair shop had found its own rhythm, as if the girls had always been there. Every morning, Emily helped Charles organize the tools, showing a genuine interest in the trade. Holly colored with worn pencils on recycled paper, filling the space with colorful drawings that Charles proudly hung on the workshop wall. Even Sarah had begun to relax slightly, helping with small tasks, though her gaze still drifted to the window whenever a bus stopped. The hope that her father would return slowly faded, like a candle burning down to nothing. No one mentioned it, but everyone knew. That Wednesday morning, Charles counted the coins saved in a hidden tin under a loose floorboard. His face darkened as he confirmed what he already knew. It wasn't nearly enough for the rent he had to pay in 2 days. You're worried about money, Sarah's voice startled him. He hadn't noticed the girl watching him from the doorway. A little, he admitted, seeing no point in lying to her. But I'll find a solution. Sarah approached, her eyes assessing the few coins scattered on the table. Could we help? She offered seriously. Emily and I can work. We used to sell bracelets with Mom at the market. The offer, so adult coming from an 11-year-old girl, tugged at Charles's heart. No, Sarah, you should worry about being children, about playing, about learning, not about earning money. We're not really children anymore, she replied with a maturity she shouldn't have. Not since Mom died. Before Charles could respond, the doorbell rang. Both turned to find a young, professional-looking woman observing the shop with calculated attention. Good morning, she greeted with a polite but distant smile. Mr. Charles Smith? That's me, the shoemaker replied, instinctively placing himself between the woman and Sarah. Miss Brenda Davis from Child Protective Services, she introduced herself, showing official identification. We received a report about 3 minors possibly in a situation of abandonment at this establishment. Time seemed to stop. Charles felt the floor sway beneath his feet as Sarah visibly tensed beside him. There must be a misunderstanding, he said, trying to maintain his composure. They're my nieces. They're with me temporarily while their mother is ill. The social worker looked at him with a mix of skepticism and professional compassion. Could I speak with all 3 of them? It's protocol in these cases. Charles nodded slightly. He saw no other option. He led the woman to the back room, where Emily and Holly were drawing together. Seeing the stranger, both girls immediately became wary, looking to their older sister for guidance. Girls, this is Miss Davis. She wants to talk to you for a moment. The social worker approached with gentle movements, like someone approaching frightened animals. Hello, little ones. What are your names? Emily and Holly remained silent until Sarah, who had followed them, spoke for them. I'm Sarah. These are my sisters, Emily and Holly. Sarah, can I ask you how long you've been with your Uncle Charles? The girl caught the lie in midair without hesitation. A few days. Our mummy is sick in the hospital and their dad. A tense silence filled the room. It was Holly who broke the ice with the innocence of her 4 years. Daddy went to Los Angeles, she said. He said he'd come back, but he hasn't. Brenda Davis noted something in her notebook, while Sarah shot an anxious glance at Charles. Do you have any documents with you? Birth certificates, social security cards, any written authorization from your mother? They're at my house, Charles improvised. Here we just have the basics while I work. The social worker nodded slowly, evaluating the situation. Mr. Smith, I understand you want to help, but there are legal procedures. I need to see those documents as soon as possible and verify the mother's situation. She handed him a card. You have 48 hours to present them at my office, or I'll have to initiate a protective process, which could mean transferring the girls to a temporary shelter. When the door closed behind Miss Davis, a heavy silence fell upon them. It was Emily who finally spoke, her voice trembling. They're going to separate us. Charles wanted to promise no, that he would find a solution, but the words caught in his throat. He couldn't make promises he might not be able to keep. I'll do everything I can to prevent that from happening. That was all he could say. Sarah, who had remained strangely quiet, approached her sisters and hugged them protectively. We have to leave, she declared firmly, before they take us. Where would we go, Sarah? Emily asked, her eyes filled with fear. I don't know, but together, always together. Charles watched the exchange, feeling a knot in his stomach. These girls had lost their mother, had been abandoned by their father, and now faced the possibility of being separated. He couldn't allow it. Listen to me, he said, kneeling down to their level, ignoring the pain in his knees. You're not going anywhere, and they won't separate you. I'll find a way. But as he uttered those words, a question hammered in his mind. How would he keep that promise? With no money for rent, no legal documents, no relation to the girls, what could an old shoemaker do to confront the system? The answer came unexpectedly that same afternoon, when a regular customer entered the shoe repair shop. Mr. Smith, how are you? I'm here for my shoes, the ones I left last week. Mr. David Brooks was a middle-aged lawyer who worked in the courts near the terminal. For years he had trusted only Charles with the care of his footwear. Good afternoon, Mr. Brooks. I have them ready. As he searched for the shoes, an idea began to form in Charles's mind. Mr. Brooks, can I ask you for some legal advice? The lawyer nodded with interest. Of course. How can I help you? Charles looked towards the back room, making sure the girls couldn't hear, and in a low voice, he told him the situation. David listened intently, his expression turning serious. It's complicated, Mr. Smith. Without a blood relation and with a father who technically hasn't given up his rights, the legal process would be long and costly. But is there any possibility? The lawyer thought for a moment. We could request emergency temporary custody, arguing abandonment, but we'd need proof, witnesses, and, honestly, resources. I don't have much money, Charles admitted, but I have my work, my tools. I don't just mean money, Mr. Smith. Child Protective Services will investigate your situation, your living space, your income, your age. David didn't need to finish the sentence. Both knew what it implied. I understand, Charles replied, feeling the weight of reality on his shoulders. But I can't let them go to a shelter. I can't let them be separated. David observed the old shoemaker with a mixture of admiration and concern. Let me see what I can find out. I know someone at Child Protective Services who might be able to guide us. He paid for his shoes and added, and don't worry about the fees. You owe me so many free repairs that I've lost count. That night, while the girls slept, Charles remained awake, contemplating the small print of the Virgin Mary that Eleanor had placed on the wall years ago. Eleanor, he whispered as if she could hear him, what should I do? We always wanted children, and now that these girls need me, I don't know if I can protect them. Silence was his only answer. But in his heart, Charles knew what Eleanor would have said, that some encounters are not coincidences, that sometimes family is formed in unexpected ways. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft moan. Holly stirred in her sleep, her face contorted by some nightmare. Charles approached and gently placed a hand on her forehead, noting with alarm that she was burning with fever. Holly, he called gently, trying to wake her. Little Holly. The girl opened her eyes, disoriented and feverish. She immediately began to cough, a dry, painful sound that alarmed Charles. Mommy, she murmured between coughs. It hurts. Sarah and Emily woke instantly, alarmed by their sister's condition. She has a high fever, Sarah said, touching Holly's forehead. The fear in her voice was palpable. She needs a doctor, Charles decided now. No, Sarah firmly denied. If we take her, they'll ask questions, they'll separate us. Sarah, she's very sick. She needs medicine. Emily, always the voice of reason, intervened. Don't you know a doctor who can come here? Charles thought quickly. Dr. Thomas Jenkins has a small clinic nearby. He's an old friend. I could trust him. Go, Sarah decided, surprising everyone. We'll take care of Holly in the meantime. Without wasting time, Charles grabbed his jacket and went out into the cool October night. The streets were almost deserted as he hurried towards the small clinic he knew. Dr. Jenkins kept open late. Thomas Jenkins was about to close when Charles arrived, gasping for breath. "Charles, what's wrong?" "Thomas, I need your help. There's a sick girl with a high fever and cough. I can't take her to a hospital. It's complicated." The doctor, a 60-year-old man with a kindness that reflected in his tired eyes, asked no more questions. He grabbed his bag and followed Charles back to the shoe repair shop. On the way, Charles briefly explained the situation, trusting in his old friend's discretion. "I understand why you didn't want to take her to a hospital," Thomas said. "But Charles, you'll eventually have to legalize these girls' situation." "I know. I'm looking for a way." When they arrived, they found Holly even more feverish, breathing with difficulty while Sarah placed damp cloths on her forehead. "Doctor." Jenkins examined her meticulously, listening to her breathing, checking her throat, taking her temperature. "It's bronchitis," he finally diagnosed, "quite strong but treatable with antibiotics." He looked at Charles seriously. "She'll need medication and care for several days. If she gets worse, we'll have to take her to the hospital regardless of the consequences." As the doctor prepared an injection to bring down the fever, Sarah didn't leave her sister's side for a second, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement. "You'll be okay, little Holly, I promise." Charles watched the scene, his heart aching. These girls had been through so much, and yet their ability to care for each other remained intact. Dr. Jenkins finished administering the injection and wrote a prescription. "She'll need these medications every 8 hours. The fever should go down soon, but the cough will persist for a few days." Before leaving, he placed a hand on Charles's shoulder. "I'll stop by tomorrow to check on her. And Charles, they're good girls. They deserve stability." "I know, Thomas, thank you." After the doctor left, Charles went to the nearest pharmacy for the medications. When he returned, he found Sarah in the same place, watching over her sister, whose breathing seemed to have calmed down a bit. "The injection is taking effect," Charles commented as he prepared the antibiotic dose. Sarah nodded without taking her eyes off Holly. "Sarah," Charles said softly, "you should rest a bit. I can watch her." The girl shook her head. "It's my responsibility. I promised Mom I would always take care of them." "And you do it wonderfully," Charles replied, sitting next to her. "But sometimes even the strongest need help. Sharing the burden doesn't make you less responsible." Something in those words seemed to touch a deep chord in Sarah. Her shoulders, always tense, relaxed slightly. "I'm so scared," Sarah confessed in a barely audible whisper. "All the time. Scared of failing them, of not being enough, of being separated." It was the first time Sarah revealed her vulnerability, the first crack in the armor she had built around her heart. "It's normal to be scared," Charles replied softly. "I am too. But you know, Eleanor used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting despite it. And you, Sarah, are the bravest person I've met in a long time." The girl looked up, surprised by the compliment. "Why are you helping us?" she asked, a question she had been holding since that rainy night. "We're nothing to you." Charles pondered his answer, wanting to be completely honest. "Eleanor and I always wanted to have children," he began. "We tried for years, but they never came. When she got sick, she made me promise I would keep going, that I would find a purpose." He smiled softly. And then, on a stormy night, 3 little ones appeared behind some boxes. Sarah processed his words in silence as she watched her sleeping sisters. "Mom used to say there are no coincidences," she finally murmured, "or that paths cross for a reason." "Your mother was a wise woman," Charles agreed. A silent understanding, fragile but real, began to form between them as they watched over Holly together during the night. They weren't empty words of comfort or promises they might not be able to keep, but the simple truth of 2 people who, despite the difference in age and experience, shared a similar burden, the desire to protect what they loved in a world that seemed to conspire against them. When dawn began to filter through the window, Holly woke up. Her fever had significantly decreased, although the cough persisted. "Did I sleep a lot?" she asked in a hoarse voice. "Just enough to get better," Sarah replied, stroking her hair. Charles prepared some tea with honey that Dolores had brought the day before, special for the throat. As Holly drank it in small sips, she looked at Charles with her big brown eyes, now brighter. "I had a beautiful dream," she said. "I dreamed that we all lived together in a big house with a yard full of flowers, and we made colorful shoes like the ones Mom used to draw." The simplicity of the dream, the innocence with which she shared it, moved Charles to tears. He discreetly wiped them away, pretending to rub his tired eyes. "That's a very beautiful dream, Holly," he managed to say. Emily, who had just woken up, joined the conversation. "We could make it come true," she said with her characteristic practicality. "Help Mr. Smith with the shoes. Mom taught us to embroider and sew." Before they could continue that line of thought, someone knocked on the shop door. Charles tensed, fearing it was Mr. Johnson again, or worse, the social worker returning earlier than expected. To his relief, it was Dr. Jenkins, keeping his promise to return. "Good morning," he greeted, entering the back room. "How's our little patient?" He examined Holly, pleased with her improvement. "The fever has gone down, but she still needs rest and medication. No going out into the cold for a few days." As he put away his stethoscope, he looked at Charles meaningfully. "Can we talk for a moment?" Both men went out to the workshop, leaving the girls inside. "Charles, have you thought about what you'll do when Child Protective Services returns? Because they will." The shoemaker nodded heavily. "A client of mine, a lawyer, is seeing if there's any legal possibility that I can keep them, and the father hasn't returned, nor do I think he will. He abandoned them here at the terminal almost a week ago." The doctor thought for a moment. "I could sign a medical certificate for Holly saying she shouldn't be moved these days. It would buy you some time at least." "I'd really appreciate that, Thomas, and if you need a witness about your ability to care for them, count on me." The doctor smiled. "I've known you for 30 years, Charles. I know what kind of man you are." After the doctor left, Charles opened the shoe repair shop as usual, though his mind was divided between work and worrying about Holly, about the money he needed to raise in 2 days, and about the imminent visit from the social worker. Mid-morning, the doorbell rang, and Mr. Brooks, the lawyer, entered. His expression was serious but determined. "Mr. Smith, I spoke with my contact at Child Protective Services. The situation is complicated but not impossible." He lowered his voice. "Miss Davis is strict but fair. If we can show that you can provide a stable home and that the father effectively abandoned them, there's a chance for temporary custody. What would we need for that? Witnesses to the abandonment, proof of stable income, adequate living space." David paused, noticing the worry on Charles's face. "And honestly, resolving the situation with the shop. They can't permanently live in a back room of a shoe repair shop at the terminal." The reality hit Charles hard. Even if he managed to raise the money for this month, what about the next? Mr. Johnson clearly wanted to evict him, and with 3 girls, he would need a larger, more suitable space. "I understand," he finally said. "How much time do we have?" "Miss Davis agreed to give you 1 more week, thanks to Dr. Jenkins' medical certificate. But after that, she'll need to see concrete progress, or she'll initiate the institutionalization process." When the lawyer left, Charles sat heavily on his workbench. The obstacles seemed to multiply: the money for the rent, Holly's health, the legal requirements for custody, the possible loss of the shop. Bad news? Emily's voice pulled him from his thoughts. The girl had silently come out of the back room and was now watching him with concern. Charles tried to smile. "Just adult stuff, little one. How's Holly?" "Better. Sarah is telling her a story so she can rest." Emily approached the workbench and picked up a piece of leather, examining it with interest. "Mr. Smith, can I ask you something?" "Of course. If our dad never comes back, what will happen to us?" The question, so direct and yet so loaded with implications, caught Charles by surprise. Emily was only 8, but her understanding of the situation was sharp. "Well, he began, not knowing exactly what to say. "Could we stay with you?" Emily asked before he could continue. "I know we're not real family, but—" She left the sentence unfinished as if afraid of the answer. Charles's heart swelled with a mixture of emotion and fear. How easy it would be to promise, to say yes, to assure her that they would always have a home with him, but reality was more complicated. "I'd like that very much, Emily," he replied sincerely. "But there are many things to resolve first. Laws, papers, a suitable place to live. We could help, the girl insisted. Mom taught us to work, and we're good girls. We don't cause trouble. Oh, Emily. Charles knelt down to her height, ignoring the pain in his knees. It's not about whether you're good girls or not. Of course you are. It's just that the adult world is full of complications that shouldn't concern you. Emily nodded as if she perfectly understood the unspoken implications. So, should we prepare to go to an orphanage? The question, asked with such resigned maturity, broke something inside Charles. He couldn't allow these girls, who had already lost so much, to also lose their right to stay together, to have a home. No, Emily, he replied with a firmness that surprised even himself. You're not going to any orphanage. I'll find a way for us to be together. I promise you. It was a reckless promise, perhaps impossible to keep given his meager resources and the many legal barriers. But seeing hope reborn in Emily's eyes, he knew he would do anything to keep it. That afternoon, while Charles worked on repairing a pair of shoes, Emily remained by his side, carefully observing his every move. At one point, she picked up a discarded piece of leather and began to draw on it with a pencil, creating intricate, geometric patterns similar to those her mother used to knit. "What are you doing?" Charles asked, intrigued by the girl's concentration. "Drawings like Mom used to make," she explained. "They're Native American symbols. This is the deer. It means strength and guidance. This is the eye of God that protects families." As she spoke, her small fingers precisely traced shapes she had clearly seen and practiced many times. "They're beautiful," Charles commented sincerely. "Mom used to say that each design tells a story, and that when you make them, you put a little bit of your soul into them." Emily looked up, her eyes bright with a sudden idea. What if we decorated shoes like this with Native American designs? They'd be unique. No one else would have them. The suggestion, so simple yet so innovative, sparked an idea in Charles's mind. In 40 years of repairing shoes, he had never considered designing something completely new. "That's a fascinating idea, Emily," he said, genuinely impressed. "But I don't know if people would buy shoes decorated like that." "Why not? They're pretty, and they tell stories." Mom always sold her crafts, even if they were more expensive than other things, because they were special. Emily's childlike but accurate logic made Charles reconsider. Perhaps she was right, but the thought also brought a pang of unease. In a world increasingly driven by profit, how would they protect these unique designs, imbued with such personal and cultural significance, from being merely copied? Perhaps she was right. In a world of mass-produced impersonal products, something unique, handmade with cultural significance, might find its place. Before he could respond, a scream from the back room alerted them. "Emily, Mr. Smith, come quick." It was Sarah, her voice tinged with urgency. Both ran into the room to find Holly burning with fever again, her breathing ragged and difficult. She was fine, and then suddenly she started breathing like this. Sarah explained, fear evident in her voice. Charles touched the girl's forehead, alarmed by the heat radiating from her. "We have to take her to Dr. Jenkins," he decided immediately. "The fever's back and her breathing isn't right." This time Sarah didn't protest. Holly's condition was visibly worse than before. "I'm coming with you," she said, grabbing a small blanket to wrap her sister in. Charles carried Holly in his arms, feeling her tiny body burn as the little one struggled to breathe properly. Emily followed him to the shop door. "Do you want to come too?" Charles asked. Emily shook her head. Someone has to stay in case Dad comes back, but the tone with which she said it revealed that she no longer truly believed in that possibility. "We'll be back soon," Charles promised. "Lock the door securely." As they hurried towards Dr. Jenkins' clinic, Sarah kept a hand on her sister's forehead, whispering words of encouragement. Charles noticed that she no longer looked around for her father in every man who passed. Her attention was completely focused on Holly. "She'll be okay," Charles assured her, though worry squeezed his own chest. "Dr. Jenkins will know what to do." Sarah nodded, trusting his words completely for the first time. When they arrived at the clinic, the doctor received them immediately, alarmed by the girl's condition. "The relapse is worse than the initial episode," he diagnosed after examining her. "She needs oxygen and intravenous medication. We'll have to take her to the hospital." "To the hospital?" Charles asked, fearing the complications that would entail. Dr. Jenkins considered the situation, aware of the implications. I can treat her here tonight. I have the necessary equipment, but if she doesn't improve by tomorrow, there will be no alternative. As the doctor prepared the treatment, Sarah remained by Holly's side, holding her hand. Charles watched the scene, admiring the girl's strength, who, despite her young age, showed the composure of an adult. "Mr. Smith," Sarah called softly, "if Holly needs to go to the hospital, they'll find us, right? The authorities." The shoemaker nodded, unable to lie to her. "And they'll take us to a shelter. They'll separate us." "Not if I can help it," Charles replied. "I already told you. I'll find a way." Sarah looked at him for a long time, as if evaluating the truthfulness of his words. Then, surprisingly, she extended her hand and took Charles's. "I believe you," she said simply. Those two words, spoken with the solemnity of a promise, meant more to Charles than any recognition he had ever received in his life. In the midst of the crisis between fear and uncertainty, Sarah had decided to trust him. And at that instant, looking at the oldest girl, whose initial distrust had transformed into confidence, at little Holly bravely fighting her illness, and thinking of Emily faithfully waiting for them at the shoe repair shop, Charles Smith made a decision that would change the course of all their lives. He would no longer seek a temporary solution. He would fight with all his strength to become the family these girls so desperately needed and deserved. Outside, night fell over Phoenix, and with it, the destiny of four people whom chance, perhaps something more, had brought together in a small shoe repair shop at the bus terminal, began to intertwine in ways none would have imagined just a few days prior. Dawn found Charles dozing in an uncomfortable chair beside the cot where Holly rested. The little one was now breathing more easily thanks to the oxygen and medication. Sarah slept curled up in another armchair. Dr. Jenkins had insisted they stay at the clinic all night to monitor the girl's progress. Charles woke with a start, feeling a hand on his shoulder. It was the doctor, looking at him with a tired but optimistic smile. "Her fever has dropped considerably," he informed in a low voice, so as not to wake the girls. "And her oxygen levels have improved. She responded well to the treatment. That means we won't have to take her to the hospital. If she continues like this, you can take her home this afternoon, but she'll need to follow the medications rigorously and get a lot of rest." Charles exhaled with relief. "Thank you, Thomas. I don't know how to repay you for all this." The doctor shook his head. "Not everything in life is paid with money, Charles. Besides, you owe me so many repaired pairs of shoes that I've lost count." Both chuckled softly. "Go home, get some rest, and come back this afternoon. I'll stay and watch her. I need to tell Emily. She must be worried. Eat something first. You look like you're about to collapse." Charles nodded, acknowledging that he was physically and emotionally exhausted. Before leaving, he approached Sarah and gently touched her shoulder. The girl woke immediately, alert as always. "Holly, is she okay?" was the first thing she asked. "Much better," Charles reassured her. "The doctor says her fever has dropped. I'm going to see Emily and I'll be back later. Will you be all right here with Dr. Jenkins?" Sarah nodded, looking at her peacefully sleeping little sister. "I won't leave her side," she promised. As he walked back to the terminal, Charles noticed the city beginning to wake up. Street vendors were setting up their stalls, small shops were opening their doors, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and hot waffles filled the air. It was Halloween, and everywhere he saw preparations for the celebrations, pumpkin decorations, candy corn in the stores, little skeleton figures. Eleanor loved this holiday. Every year they would decorate a small display together in the shoe repair shop, remembering her parents and grandparents. After her death, Charles had continued the tradition, placing her photograph next to the candles and sweet treats. This year, he realized, the display would have a special meaning, not only for Eleanor but for the girl's mother, whom he had never met, but whose absence had so profoundly marked their lives. Upon arriving at the shoe repair shop, he found Emily asleep in the chair by the window, from where she had clearly been watching for their return. Hearing the door, she woke immediately. "Mr. Smith, how's Holly? Why didn't you come back last night?" The questions tumbled out as the girl ran towards him. "Holly's much better," he replied, placing a comforting hand on her head. "But the doctor preferred she stay at the clinic to keep an eye on her. Sarah is with her, and we can bring them home this afternoon." The worry on Emily's face gave way to relief. "I was scared. I didn't know if I should go look for you or stay here in case Dad came back." Charles noticed that she mentioned her father more out of obligation than real hope. With each passing day, the girls seemed to gradually accept the reality of their abandonment. "You did well to stay," he reassured her. "Now how about we have some breakfast and then open the shoe repair shop? I have some pending work to finish." As they prepared a simple breakfast with what little was left in the pantry, Emily observed the small calendar hanging on the wall. "Today is Halloween," she commented. "At home we always made a display for Mom." "I make one for Eleanor, my wife too," Charles replied. "Would you like us to make one together this year?" "For your mom and for Eleanor." Emily's eyes lit up. "Could we? With decorations and candy and everything?" "Of course. After we open the shoe repair shop, we can buy what we need." The morning passed with surprising tranquility. Charles worked on pending orders while Emily, sitting on a small stool beside him, continued experimenting with designs on pieces of leather. Occasionally, a customer would arrive, and the girl would attentively observe Charles attending to them, explaining the work, agreeing on prices. At noon, Dolores stopped by the shoe repair shop, alarmed to hear what had happened to Holly. "Goodness gracious, poor thing," she exclaimed. "Do you need anything? Food, clothes, anything?" "We're fine, Dolores. Thanks, Doctor. Jenkins has been very generous." The woman nodded but still left a basket of food. "For when the girls come back, they need to eat well." Before leaving, Dolores paused at the door as if remembering something. "By the way, yesterday a man came to my stand asking about 3 girls. He said he was family." Charles tensed immediately. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing, of course. He didn't give me a good feeling. Besides, if he was really family, he'd know where they are, right?" Dolores looked at him meaningfully. "Just be careful, Charles. There are eyes and ears all over the terminal." The warning left Charles uneasy. Who would be asking about the girls? The father finally returning, or someone from Child Protective Services investigating? In the afternoon, just as Dr. Jenkins had promised, Holly was recovered enough to return to the shoe repair shop. The little one was still weak, but the fever had disappeared, and her breathing was normal. Charles and Sarah carried her carefully, wrapping her in a blanket, despite the mild day, to protect her from the wind. Upon arriving, they found Emily with a surprise. She had begun to decorate a small display in the corner of the workshop. A photograph of Eleanor, which Charles kept on his workbench, occupied the center alongside a colorful drawing Emily had made based on her sister's descriptions of what their mother was like. "Do you like it?" Emily shyly asked Sarah, who was observing the display with a mixture of surprise and contained emotion. To everyone's astonishment, Sarah nodded and, without a word, hugged her sister tightly. It was the first time Charles had seen her openly express her emotions. "It's perfect," the older girl finally murmured. "Mommy would have loved it." Holly, despite her weakness, insisted on contributing to the display. With her tiny hands, she placed the rag doll she always carried with her next to the drawing. "It was Mommy's when she was little," she explained, "so she can be with us today." Moved by the gesture, Charles added to the display the old toolbox Eleanor had given him on their first wedding anniversary, along with some marigolds that Dolores had brought them. "It's Halloween," Charles explained to the girls. "They say our loved ones can visit us. The flowers and candles guide them here." As they finished decorating the display with candles, candy corn, and small decorative skeletons they bought at a nearby stall, the 4 shared stories about Eleanor and about Maria, the girl's mother. "Mommy used to sing while she worked," Emily recalled. "She always said happy hands create beautiful things." "She didn't like living in the city," Sarah added, opening the door to her memories for the first time. "She preferred our town, where she could feel the earth under her feet and see the stars at night." "Eleanor was the same," Charles smiled. "She always said that someday we would move to a small town where we would have a garden full of flowers and a bigger shoe repair shop." "Why didn't you?" Holly asked from the bed where she was resting. "Life sometimes has other plans," Charles replied softly. "When we finally had enough money, Eleanor got sick and everything changed." A respectful silence fell over the small room. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but the kind of silence that forms when people share similar pain, an understanding that goes beyond words. The doorbell interrupted the moment. An elegant woman, clearly not a regular at the terminal, entered the shoe repair shop. "Excuse me," she said in a soft but confident voice. "I was told I could find the best shoemaker in Phoenix here." "I can fix almost any footwear, ma'am," Charles replied modestly. "How can I help you?" The woman observed the workshop with interest, pausing at the display and then at the girls who were watching her with curiosity. "Actually, I'm here for something more than a repair," she smiled warmly. "My name is Miss Olivia Adams. I run a small art gallery downtown specializing in traditional crafts." She extended an elegant card that Charles took with some confusion. "My husband is an anthropologist. He works with Native American communities, documenting their traditions. We're organizing an exhibition on contemporary Native American art and its modern applications." Olivia pointed to the designs Emily had been drawing on pieces of leather. "And someone mentioned a shoemaker who was experimenting with Native American designs on footwear." Charles looked at Emily, who seemed equally confused. "There must be a misunderstanding," Charles explained. "These are just drawings the girl makes for fun. We haven't created any footwear with these designs." "Yet?" Emily intervened with unexpected confidence. "We haven't done it yet, but we could." Olivia smiled at the girl's enthusiasm. "Are you of Native American descent?" she asked with genuine interest. Emily nodded. "My mum was Navajo. She taught us to knit and make traditional designs." The woman approached to examine Emily's drawings more closely. "This is authentic art," she commented with admiration. "There's a deep understanding of the symbols and their meanings." Addressing Charles, she added, "This could be extraordinary. The fusion of traditional craftsmanship with contemporary footwear, something completely new to the market." Charles looked at Emily, whose face lit up with enthusiasm, and then at Sarah, who was observing the scene with caution but also with a glimmer of interest in her eyes. "It's not a bad idea," Charles admitted, "but we're just a small repair shop. We don't have the resources to buy materials or the experience to create footwear from scratch." Olivia didn't seem discouraged. "Our exhibition opens in 3 weeks. If you could create even a pair of prototypes, we could include them. And if they generate interest, there are possibilities for funding for cultural projects." She pulled another card from her purse and placed it next to Emily's drawings. "Think about it. It would be a beautiful way to preserve traditions and create something new at the same time." After Olivia left, an expectant silence filled the shoe repair shop. It was Emily who broke it. "We can do it. I can design the patterns, and you know how to work leather." "It's not that simple, little one," Charles replied, although the idea was beginning to take root in his mind. "We'd need materials, lasts, time, and money," Sarah added pragmatically. "We don't even have money for the rent, Mr. Smith." The harsh reality reasserted itself. Tomorrow was the final deadline for the rent payment, and Charles had barely scraped together half the required sum. However, Olivia's visit had planted a seed of possibility. "Maybe," Charles began, thinking aloud, "if we can create a prototype, something good enough to show, we could get an advance or some kind of loan." "How long would it take to make a complete pair of shoes?" Sarah asked, surprising everyone with her interest. "It depends on the design and the type of footwear. Simple sandals, maybe a day or two. More elaborate shoes, a week or more. And do we have the materials?" Charles did a mental inventory of his workshop. "I have some good quality leather scraps, enough for a small pair of sandals, thread, needles, glue, the basics. But we'd need more if we want to make something really special." The 3 girls exchanged glances, communicating silently as only siblings know how to do. "What do you think?" Charles finally asked. "Let's do it," Sarah decided with unexpected firmness. "We have nothing to lose by trying." The rest of the afternoon transformed into a hive of creative activity. Charles pulled out his best leather scraps while Emily spread out her designs. Even Holly, from her bed, offered ideas on colors and patterns. "Mom always said colors have power," Emily explained as they selected threads. "Blue represents water and sky, red blood and life, yellow the sun and corn." Charles listened, fascinated. In 40 years of working leather, he had never considered the symbolic meaning of colors beyond aesthetics. "What would you like them to be like?" he asked the girls. "What kind of footwear should we create?" "Something that tells a story," Emily suggested. "Like the eyes of God that Mom used to weave. that protect those who wear them, and they should be comfortable, Sarah added practically. Pretty shoes are useless if they hurt your feet. And colorful, Holly exclaimed from her bed. Like a rainbow on your feet, Charles smiled. The combination of beauty, symbolism, comfort, and joy seemed to him the perfect formula. They decided to start with a pair of women's sandals, using the softest leather Charles had saved. While he prepared the insoles and cut the pieces, Emily meticulously drew the patterns that would adorn the vamp and straps. Time seemed to fly as they worked. They even forgot to eat dinner, absorbed in their creation. It was Dolores who, worried about not seeing them leave all day, brought them hot dogs and warm apple cider. "What are you all up to, so focused?" she asked curiously, seeing the workshop transformed into a design studio. Charles explained about Olivia's visit and the project they had undertaken. The woman listened with growing interest. "Oh, Charles, I always knew you were more of an artist than a repairman," she exclaimed enthusiastically. "My friend Frank works at a tannery in Tucson. He could get you leather scraps at a good price if this takes off." Dolores's support strengthened everyone's determination. Even after she left, they continued working late into the night. Only when Holly began to nod off did Charles insist they rest. "We'll continue tomorrow," he promised. "The best shoes are made without rushing." That night, while the girls slept, Charles remained a little longer by the display, contemplating Eleanor's photograph and the drawing of Maria, the girl's mother. "Is this the answer, Eleanor?" he whispered. "Is this what you were trying to tell me when you insisted I would find a new purpose?" The candle flames flickered softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. For an instant, Charles felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years, as if somehow the world was finally beginning to regain the meaning lost after Eleanor's departure. The next morning, the day of the final deadline for the rent payment, Charles woke before dawn. Careful not to wake the girls, he resumed work on the sandals. By the time Emily got up, he had already finished the basic structure, precisely cut insoles, adjustable straps, and a firm but flexible sole. "They look beautiful," the girl exclaimed upon seeing them. "Now for the designs." During the next few hours, while Sarah took care of Holly, who was still convalescing, Charles and Emily worked side by side. He taught her leather stitching techniques, and she showed him how to incorporate the Native American patterns so they flowed naturally with the shape of the foot. Near noon, the doorbell announced the arrival of a customer. However, it wasn't an ordinary customer. "Good afternoon," greeted a middle-aged man, dressed in expensive but somewhat disheveled clothes. "I was looking for Smith's shoes." "You're in it," Charles replied, studying the stranger. There was something about his gaze, an unsettling familiarity that he couldn't place. "I was told you make special shoes with designs." The question was innocent, but the tone in which he asked it instantly put Charles on guard. "We're working on a project for a gallery," he explained cautiously. "Can I help you with anything else?" The man smiled, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, I'm looking for my daughters. I was told they might be here." Time seemed to stop. Charles felt the floor sway beneath his feet as he looked directly into the man's eyes. Now he understood why they seemed familiar. They were the same dark eyes as Sarah's. "Your daughters," he managed to articulate, though he already knew the answer. "Yes, 3 girls. I left them briefly at the terminal a few weeks ago while I ran an urgent errand." The man maintained a tense smile. "There was a family emergency, and I had to travel to Los Angeles. I've been looking for them since I got back." The lie was so evident that Charles felt a surge of indignation. 2 weeks was briefly, and he only appeared now when the project was starting to prosper. Before he could respond, the curtain separating the workshop from the back room moved, and Emily appeared, drawn by the unknown voice. Her eyes widened immensely as she recognized the visitor. "Dad," her voice was barely a whisper. The man opened his arms in a theatrical gesture. "Emily, my little one, I finally found you." The girl's reaction was not what the man expected. Instead of running into his arms, Emily recoiled, her face reflecting a mixture of confusion and fear. "Why did you take so long?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. The man lowered his arms, his false smile vanishing. "I already told you, there was an emergency. Your Uncle Frank had an accident. I had to go to Los Angeles. I've been looking for you since I got back." Sarah then appeared with Holly by the hand. The older girl froze at the sight of her father, while the little one, after a moment of confusion, let go of her sister's hand and ran towards the man. "Daddy, you're back!" she exclaimed, throwing herself into his arms with the innocence typical of her 4 years. The man picked her up in a gesture that might have seemed affectionate if not for the calculating look he directed at Charles. "Thank you for taking care of my daughters," he said, his tone pretending to be cordial. "I'm indebted to you, but now I can take them home." "We don't have a home," Sarah intervened with surprising harshness. "We lost it when Mom died. We lived in a borrowed room until you brought us here and left us." The coldness in the girl's voice contrasted painfully with the innocent joy of Holly, who played with the buttons on her father's shirt, oblivious to the drama unfolding. "Sarah, don't talk like that," the man reprimanded, his tone hardening. "I'm your father. I came for you as soon as I could." "Why now?" Charles's question hung in the air, loaded with implications. "Why exactly when we're starting a project with these shoes?" The man narrowed his eyes, all pretense of cordiality vanishing. "I don't know what you're talking about, sir. I came because they're my daughters, and I've been looking for them." Addressing the girls, he added, "Pack your things. We're leaving now." "You can't leave," Charles intervened. "There's a legal process underway. Child Protective Services is aware of their situation." The mention of authorities seemed to disturb the man, who instinctively tightened his grip on Holly. "They're my daughters," he repeated, his voice descending to a threatening tone. "I have every legal right to them. A right you abandoned when you left them alone in a bus terminal," Charles retorted, his usual calm giving way to indignation. "If you truly cared about them, you wouldn't have waited 2 weeks to come back." A tense silence fell over the shoe repair shop. Emily had backed away to position herself next to Charles, while Sarah remained motionless, her gaze fixed on her father with a mixture of rage and pain that no 11-year-old girl should experience. "We can discuss this like adults," the man finally said, changing tactics. "I understand you've grown fond of the girls. Perhaps we can reach an agreement." "An agreement?" Charles repeated, confused. The man put Holly down, who immediately ran to Sarah. "I've heard about these special shoes you're making. Native American designs, right? Maria, my late wife, was an artisan. Those designs," he gestured vaguely towards the workshop where the finished pairs were displayed, "are family property. Part of the cultural legacy she left for her daughters." The true motivation began to reveal itself, and it was more sordid than Charles had imagined. "So you didn't come for your daughters?" he concluded, his voice tinged with disdain. "You came for the shoes for the money. I came for what's mine," the man replied, abandoning all pretense. "These girls and everything they know how to do is my responsibility. If anyone is going to benefit from the knowledge Maria taught them, it should be me." Sarah stepped forward, her small body trembling with rage. "You never valued what Mom did," she accused. "You made fun of her crafts. You said they were silly, worthless. And now that someone else sees their value, you come to claim them?" The precision of the reproach seemed to strike the man like a whip. For an instant, his mask of paternal indignation cracked, revealing the underlying greed. "You're a child," he snapped. "You don't understand how the world works. If there's money to be made from those designs, it belongs to me by right. They don't belong to you." Emily intervened with unusual firmness. "Mom taught them to us, not to you. You never wanted to learn." The man ignored the girls and addressed Charles directly. "Listen, we can be partners. You provide the workshop. I provide the girls and their knowledge. We split the profits. Everyone benefits." The proposal, so devoid of any consideration for the little one's well-being, churned Charles's stomach. "The girls are not merchandise," he replied, his voice firm but controlled. "They are not for sale or rent. And if you truly believed they were your responsibility, you wouldn't have abandoned them." "Don't preach to me," the man hissed. "You know nothing of my circumstances. I did what I had to do." "And what was that exactly?" Sarah asked, her voice cold and sharp. "What was so important that it justified leaving us alone in a terminal?" For an instant, something resembling shame crossed the man's face, but he quickly composed himself. "I had a business opportunity in Los Angeles. I couldn't take them with me, it was too risky." "What kind of business?" the girl insisted. The man shrugged. "Adult things, nothing you need to worry about." But Sarah wasn't willing to accept evasions. With a maturity that far surpassed her 11 years, she pulled a folded paper from her pocket and unfolded it in front of her father. "This was your business." Charles leaned in to see the paper. It was a newspaper clipping from a few days ago. It announced the opening of a new shoe store in the fashion outlet mall. Modern Footwear presents its new line of artisan footwear with Native American motifs. The man's face visibly paled. "Where did you get that?" "I saw it in the newspaper Mr. Smith uses to wrap repaired shoes," Sarah replied. "I recognized the designs. They're exactly what Mom taught us." The pieces began to fit together. Charles remembered Dolores's warning about the man asking for the girls. The sudden appearance of this man, just as the project was beginning to succeed. "You sold the designs," Charles concluded, the revelation hitting him like a weight. "You used your late wife's traditional knowledge to make money, and then you abandoned your daughters." "It's not that simple," the man defended himself, though his tone had lost strength. "I needed the money. I was going to come back for them when the deal closed." "But something went wrong, didn't it?" Sarah continued, tears of rage glistening in her eyes. "They paid you less than you expected, or you spent the money, and it wasn't worth it to come back for us anymore." The man's silence was all the confirmation they needed. "And now that you heard about our project with the gallery," Emily added, "you came back to try to profit more." The villainy of the situation was overwhelming. Not only had he abandoned his daughters, but he had exploited the cultural legacy of his deceased wife, selling it to the highest bidder without regard for its meaning or value. "Go with him," Charles suddenly said, surprising everyone, even himself. The girls looked at him in horror while their father forced a triumphant smile. "You can't stay with someone who values you so little," Charles continued, his voice cracking slightly. "Someone who sees you as merchandise, as a way to make money. You deserve better." The girls' smiles returned as they understood his strategy. Their father, however, was starting to look nervous. "Pack your things, Holly," he ordered, reaching out to the little one. "We're leaving now." But Holly didn't move. She clung to Sarah's skirt, suddenly fearful of the man who had appeared out of nowhere claiming them. "I want to stay with Mr. Smith," she murmured. "He tells us stories and teaches me to draw, and he doesn't leave us alone." "Don't be ridiculous," the man snapped, losing his patience. "He's nobody to you. I'm your father." "A father protects," Sarah replied firmly. "A father stays." The tension in the shoe repair shop was palpable. Emily and Sarah had positioned themselves protectively next to Holly as the man looked at them with growing frustration. "And you have no choice," he finally said, his voice descending to a threatening tone. "Legally, you belong to me, and if you don't come with me voluntarily, I'll come back with the police." At that precise moment, as if destiny had orchestrated their appearance, the shoe repair shop door opened, and Miss Brenda Davis entered, accompanied by Mr. Brooks. "Good morning," the social worker greeted, her sharp gaze immediately assessing the tense scene. "It seems we arrived at an interesting moment." The girl's father turned, surprised by the interruption. Seeing the official identifications, his attitude visibly changed. "Miss Davis from Child Protective Services," she introduced herself. "And Mr. Brooks, a lawyer. And you are?" "Mr. Robert Green," the man replied, quickly composing himself. "The girl's father. I've come to pick them up after an urgent trip." "A 2-week trip, Mr. Brooks commented, consulting his notes, "during which you left 3 minors alone in a bus terminal without supervision or means to subsist. An interesting definition of responsible parenthood." The social worker approached the girls, who were still grouped together with Charles. "Girls, what do you prefer?" she asked directly. "To go with your father or to stay with Mr. Smith?" "That's not relevant," Robert protested. "They're minors. They can't decide." "On the contrary, miss," Davis replied with professional calm. "In custody dispute cases, especially when there's evidence of abandonment, the opinion of the minors is fundamental to our evaluation." The 3 girls responded in unison without a moment's hesitation. "We want to stay with Mr. Smith." Robert Green looked around, feeling cornered. His plan was rapidly crumbling. "You don't understand," he tried again, addressing the social worker. "This man is exploiting my daughter's traditional knowledge for his own benefit." "Are you referring to these, miss?" Davis asked, pointing to the Native American designed shoes displayed in the workshop. "Exactly," Robert confirmed. Those designs belong to their mother's cultural heritage. They are being commercially exploited without my consent. Curious, mister, Brooks intervened, pulling out another newspaper clipping. Because according to this advertisement, you already sold those same designs to a retail chain 2 weeks ago. The same designs you now claim as untouchable family heritage. Robert Green's face fell. His last card had just been nullified. Mr. Green, Miss, Davis said with professional firmness, given the evidence of abandonment, the consistent statements of the girls, and your apparent interest in commercially exploiting their knowledge, I am going to recommend the temporary suspension of your parental rights while a full investigation is conducted. You can't do that, Robert exclaimed, finally losing his composure. They're my daughters. Being a biological parent does not automatically grant the right to custody, the social worker replied. The well-being of the minors is our priority. Seeing that his position was untenable, Robert Green abruptly changed tactics. Fine, keep them, he snapped, addressing Charles. But this isn't over. Those designs have value, and I'll find a way to claim what's mine. With those menacing words, he headed for the door. Before leaving, he looked at his daughters one last time, but not with affection or remorse, but with the cold calculation of someone who has lost an investment. I'll be back, he warned, and the door closed behind him with a bang that echoed in the sudden silence of the shoe repair shop. The girls remained motionless for an instant, processing what had happened. It was Holly who broke the spell, running to Charles and hugging his legs tightly. We don't have to leave anymore? She asked in a small voice. No, little one, Charles replied, bending down to hug her. And you don't have to go anywhere. But as he hugged the girl and saw the expressions of relief on Sarah's and Emily's faces, Charles couldn't help but feel a growing unease. Robert Green's threats had not been empty words, and the newfound tranquility of this improvised family now hung by a thread more fragile than ever. The unexpected visit from Robert Green had left a trail of unease in the small shoe repair shop, although Miss Tribe. Davis had favorably recommended temporary custody for Charles. The biological father's threat hung in the air like a dark cloud, overshadowing the joy of the Native American shoe project. He can't take them from us, can he? Charles asked Mr. Brooks after the social worker left. The lawyer sighed, taking off his glasses to clean them with a handkerchief, a gesture he made when he needed time to choose his words. Legally, he has rights as the biological father, he finally explained. But the documented abandonment works in our favor, and now with this new evidence that he sold the girls' cultural designs for his own benefit, he shook his head. We have a solid case for temporary custody, but we need to be prepared. That man won't give up easily. The lawyer's words confirmed Charles's fears. It wasn't just custody that Robert coveted, but the economic potential represented by his daughter's traditional knowledge. That night, after the girls fell asleep, Charles stayed awake, contemplating the almost finished shoes. In just 2 weeks, they had gone from a desperate idea to a possible salvation. But now the very opportunity that promised a better future also attracted threats he never anticipated. What will we do if he comes back, Eleanor? He whispered to his wife's photograph. I can't lose them. Not now. Silence was his only answer, but in his heart, Charles knew what he had to do. Protect the girls at any cost, even if it meant facing challenges he never imagined confronting at 65. The next morning, Olivia Adams visited the shoe repair shop to see the progress of the shoes. Her expression lit up when she saw the 2 finished pairs and the third almost ready. They're spectacular, she exclaimed, examining every detail. The contrast between the traditional Native American craftsmanship and the contemporary design is perfect. They'll be the centerpiece of the exhibition. Her enthusiasm momentarily lifted the spirits in the workshop. The girls, especially Emily, proudly explained the meaning of each symbol and color. The sun representing life, the sacred deer symbolizing spiritual guidance, the eyes of God protecting the wearer. There's something special about these shoes, Olivia commented, observing the interaction between Charles and the girls. They're not just crafts. There's a story behind them, a deeper meaning. They're the bridge between 2 worlds, Emily explained with a wisdom that surpassed her 8 years. Mom's world, who was Navajo, and ours here in the city like us. Olivia nodded, moved by the girl's reflection. That's exactly what we want to show in the exhibition. Not just beautiful objects, but the dialogue between tradition and modernity, between intertwined cultures. Before leaving, Olivia handed Charles another envelope. "It's a second advance," she explained. "Because of the enthusiasm generated by the initial sketches I showed at the gallery, there are already interested buyers who want to place special orders." The news should have been cause for celebration, but Charles couldn't help but feel a pang of unease. "What if we can't fulfill those orders?" he asked, thinking of Robert's threat and the girl's uncertain legal situation. Olivia perceived his concern. "Mr. Brooks told me what happened yesterday," she said in a low voice. "Don't worry. I have some contacts at the National Commission for Indigenous Peoples Development. We could seek legal protection for the designs, arguing that they are the cultural heritage of the girls as Navajo descendants." The offer of help was comforting, but both knew that legal battles would take time, a resource they might not have. That afternoon, while Charles briefly went out to buy materials, Sarah made a decision that would change the course of events. Without saying anything to her sisters, she left a note and went out of the shoe repair shop, heading for the Traveler Bar, where, according to what she had overheard two customers say, her father was temporarily staying. The determination on her young face contrasted with the fear she felt inside. At her age, Sarah had taken on responsibilities no child should bear. Since her mother's death, she had become the protector of her sisters, sacrificing her own childhood for Emily's and Holly's well-being. And now she would confront the man who had abandoned them, not with pleas, but with a proposition. The Traveler was a gloomy establishment frequented by passing travelers and men seeking to drown their sorrows in cheap whiskey. Sarah stopped at the entrance, breathing deeply to steel herself. She had never entered a place like this, but the need to protect her sisters was stronger than her fear. "What are you doing here, girl?" the bartender asked when he saw her enter. "This isn't a place for kids. I'm looking for Robert Green," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Is he my father?" The bartender looked at her with skepticism, but pointed to a table in the darkest corner of the place. There, sinking into his own whirlpool of bitterness and alcohol, was Robert. "What the hell are you doing here?" he snapped when he saw her, more surprised than annoyed. "I came to make a deal," Sarah replied, sitting in front of him with a composure unusual for her age. Robert laughed bitterly. "A deal? You and me? What are you talking about, brat?" "About the shoes," she said directly, "and about us." The mention of the shoes immediately caught Robert's attention. He leaned forward, suddenly interested. "I'm listening. Leave us alone," Sarah proposed, her voice mixing firmness and desperation. "Forget about us legally. Give up your rights as a father. In return, we'll give you a share of what we earn from the shoes." Robert studied his daughter with a mixture of astonishment and unexpected respect. "You talk like an adult," he commented, taking a sip of his drink. "Your mother would be surprised." "Mommy's dead," Sarah replied coldly, "and you abandoned us. Now we have someone who really cares about us." The girl's frankness caused a grimace on Robert's face. For an instant, something resembling remorse crossed his gaze, but it was quickly replaced by the cold calculation he was more accustomed to. "How much?" he finally asked. "How much are you willing to pay me to forget about you?" The question, so devoid of any parental love, confirmed what Sarah already knew in her heart. This man had never truly been a father to them. 30% of the profits, she offered, remembering the numbers she had heard Charles and Olivia discuss. "We'll pay a lawyer to draw up a legal agreement." Robert considered the offer, obviously tempted. 50%, he countered. "That's all we can give without compromising the business." "You're a tough negotiator for a brat," Robert observed, a twisted smile forming on his lips. "All right, 35%, but I want an initial payment now as a show of good faith." Sarah swallowed hard. She hadn't anticipated this demand. "I don't have any money with me." "Then there's no deal," Robert replied, leaning back in his chair. "How do I know you'll keep your end once I give up my rights?" Desperation began to overwhelm Sarah. She had come this far, risking coming out alone, confronting her father in this inhospitable place. She couldn't leave empty-handed. "I have this," she finally said, pulling a small silver locket from her pocket. "It was Mom's. It has value, not just sentimental." Robert took the jewel, examining it with greedy eyes. It was a beautiful piece, finely crafted, with the Eye of God symbol engraved on the surface. "Why would you do this?" he suddenly asked, a flicker of humanity piercing his shell of indifference. "Why sacrifice something so valuable for an old shoemaker you barely know?" "Because he sees us," Sarah replied simply. "He sees us as people, not as a burden or a way to make money. He listens to us. He protects us. He does what you never did." The words hit Robert with the force of a slap. For a moment, the alcohol and bitterness gave way to a painful clarity. He saw his oldest daughter, so small and yet so strong, willing to sacrifice a precious memory of her mother to protect her sisters and the man who had offered them a home. "Keep this," he finally said, returning the locket. "It was your mother's. It should stay with you." Sarah looked at him, confused, not understanding the sudden change. "And I accept your original offer," Robert continued. 30%, no initial payment. But I want a legal contract signed by lawyers." "Why the change?" Sarah asked cautiously. Robert avoided her gaze, fixing his eyes on his half-empty glass. "Because you're right," he admitted in a low voice. "I was never a good father, not even a mediocre father, and you deserve better." An uncomfortable silence fell between them. It was not reconciliation or forgiveness, but the mutual recognition of a painful truth. Some relationships are too damaged to be repaired. "Tell that shoemaker to take good care of you," Robert added, finishing his drink in one gulp. "Or I'll come back to claim what's mine." Even in that moment of vulnerability, he couldn't help the threat, the reminder that his cooperation had a price. Sarah nodded and stood up to leave. Before turning around, she looked one last time at the man who shared her blood but had never truly shared her life. "Goodbye, Dad," she said softly, knowing in her heart that it would probably be the last time she would call him that. When Sarah returned to the shoe repair shop, she found Charles pale with worry. Emily had given him the note, and the old shoemaker had been about to go looking for her when he saw her enter the door. "Sarah!" he exclaimed, running towards her. "Where were you? We were worried sick." The girl, normally so composed, collapsed into his arms, finally releasing the tears she had held back throughout the confrontation with her father. "I went to see my dad," she confessed between sobs, "to make a deal." Charles guided her to a bench, where Emily and Holly joined them, forming a protective circle around their older sister. "What kind of deal?" Charles asked, fearing the answer. Sarah explained her encounter, the offer, the near loss of the locket, and Robert's unexpected concession. Charles listened in silence, a mixture of astonishment and concern reflected on his face. On the one hand, Sarah's bravery filled him with admiration. On the other hand, the idea that she had put herself in danger terrified him. "And never do anything like that again without telling me," he finally said, his voice firm but laden with emotion. "No matter how noble your intention, we're in this together, remember? We face problems together." Sarah nodded, feeling suddenly very small and very tired. "Are you mad?" "Worried," Charles corrected. "Scared to think what might have happened to you, and moved by your bravery." He hugged her again. "But what you did was dangerous, Sarah. And that deal, we can't trust the word of a man who has already shown he doesn't keep it." "He said he wanted a legal contract," the girl insisted. "With lawyers," Charles nodded thoughtfully. "I'll talk to Mr. Brooks. If there's a real possibility of resolving this legally, we'll explore it. But promise me you won't put yourself in danger like that again." The promise was sealed with a hug that included all three girls. At that moment, something subtly changed in the dynamic of this improvised family. It was no longer just Charles protecting the girls. They were also fighting to protect him and the home they had formed together. The next day, Mr. Brooks arrived early at the shoe repair shop after receiving Charles's urgent call. "It's risky," he commented after hearing the situation, "but not impossible. If he's truly willing to give up his parental rights in exchange for financial compensation, we can draft a legal agreement." "And will it be binding?" Charles asked. "Will it really protect them?" "If done correctly, yes," the lawyer assured. "But there's a bigger problem. Even with Robert's relinquishment, you don't automatically gain permanent custody. Child Protective Services will continue to evaluate if you meet the requirements to be a legal guardian." It was a sobering reminder that the path was still long and complicated. Temporary custody was only the first step in a process that could take months, even years. There's something else we need to consider, Mr. Brooks added seriously. This space, however cozy you've made it, is still the back room of a shoe repair shop in a bus terminal. For permanent custody, the authorities will evaluate if it's an adequate environment for the girl's development. Charles felt his heart sink. He had been so focused on Robert's immediate threat that he hadn't fully considered the long-term challenges. "What do you suggest?" he asked, feeling the weight of reality on his shoulders. "Look for a larger place," the lawyer replied. "A real home, where the girls have space to grow, study, play, and more importantly, enroll them in school as soon as possible. Education is a fundamental right they can't continue to lose." Mr. Brooks's words were sensible, but they posed a new dilemma. How would he pay for a larger place? Olivia's advance had covered the overdue rent and bought materials, but it wasn't enough for such a significant change. That night, after the girls fell asleep, Charles took out paper and pencil and began to calculate. The numbers were daunting. Even with promises of future orders, the reality was that they would need more, much more, to establish a suitable home where the authorities would see an environment conducive to the little one's development. "There has to be a way," he murmured to himself, rubbing his tired eyes. An idea began to form in his mind, as unexpected as it was bold. If the Native American shoes had aroused so much interest, perhaps they could expand the concept. Not just footwear, but an entire workshop school where traditional Native American techniques could be taught and applied to contemporary objects. A place that would be both a business, a home, and a school for the girls. The idea was ambitious, perhaps too much for an old shoemaker and 3 girls. But as he contemplated the almost finished shoes, tangible symbols of what they could achieve together, Charles felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. Not the fragile, fearful hope of the past few days, but a solid hope, based on real possibilities. With that vision in mind, Charles finally fell asleep, the draft of a dream sketched on crumpled paper in his hand, a dream that, unknowingly, would soon face its toughest test. The morning of the court hearing dawned grey and cold, a harbinger of the difficulties they would face. Only 3 days remained until the exhibition at Olivia's gallery, but today, everyone's attention was on the family court, where the girl's future would be decided. Charles adjusted the tie borrowed from Mr. Brooks, feeling uncomfortable in the only suit he owned, kept for years for special occasions that never came. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw an aged man with deep wrinkles and white hair. What judge in his right mind would grant custody of 3 girls to a 65-year-old man? "You look very elegant," Emily said, observing him from the doorway with admiration. Charles tried to smile, but fear tightened his throat. "Thanks, little one. Your sisters are ready." Emily nodded. All 3 wore their best clothes, carefully washed and ironed by Dolores. Sarah wore a blue dress that highlighted her dark eyes, now burdened with a maturity imposed too soon. Emily wore a yellow outfit that had belonged to her mother, adjusted by Charles's skillful hand. And Holly, in a white dress with Native American embroidery, looked like a little angel, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. "Mr. Smith," Sarah called in a serious voice, "what if the judge says we can't stay with you?" The question hung in the air like a dark cloud. Charles knelt to her height, ignoring the pain in his knees. "Whatever happens today, we'll keep fighting," he promised, looking her in the eyes. "You are the most important thing that has happened to me in many years, and I will never give up." Sarah nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Since her encounter with Robert, something had changed in her. The defensive hardness she always maintained had softened slightly, revealing the vulnerable child behind the strong facade. Mr. Brooks arrived promptly to accompany them to court. His grave expression did not help calm Charles's nerves. "How do you see our chances?" the shoemaker asked as they walked towards the waiting taxi. "I'll be frank, Mr. Smith," the lawyer replied. "Judge Miller is strict, but fair. We have solid arguments, the documented abandonment, the favorable testimonies, the obvious emotional bond." He paused before continuing. "But there are still obstacles. Your age, the current living conditions, the lack of kinship." The taxi fare was a luxury Charles could barely afford, but it was unthinkable to arrive at court with the girls by bus, especially with Holly, barely recovered from her illness. During the ride, the little one fell asleep on Charles's lap, while Sarah and Emily looked out the window, silent and tense. The family court was an imposing building that intimidated by its mere presence. Charles felt his legs falter as he climbed the stairs, but Emily's small hand in his gave him the strength he needed. In the waiting room they found Miss Davis, who greeted them with an encouraging smile. "The girls look lovely," she commented. "The judge will hear them briefly. It's important that they are honest, but also respectful." Charles nodded, though his heart was beating so loudly he feared everyone could hear it. The girls, especially Sarah, seemed to perfectly understand the importance of the moment. As they were about to enter the courtroom, a familiar figure appeared at the end of the hallway. Robert Greene, surprisingly sober and formally dressed, walking towards them with an indecipherable expression. Sarah tensed immediately, positioning herself protectively in front of her sisters. Charles felt the ground open beneath his feet. Despite the verbal agreement reached by Sarah, they had nothing signed, nothing legal to prevent Robert from claiming his daughters. "What's he doing here?" Charles whispered to Mr. Brooks. "He's the biological father," the lawyer replied in a low voice. "He has the right to be present." Robert stopped in front of them, ignoring Sarah's hostile glances and everyone's obvious discomfort. He addressed Mr. Brooks directly. "I need to speak with you before the hearing," he said with an unusual seriousness. "In private." Mr. Brooks looked at Charles, who nodded tentatively. Both men moved away to a secluded corner, where they conversed in low voices for several minutes. Charles watched anxiously, trying to interpret their expressions. When they returned, Mr. Brooks seemed surprised but cautiously optimistic. "Mr. Greene has made an important decision," he announced, "but he prefers to communicate it directly to the judge during the hearing." "What does that mean?" Charles asked, confused and alarmed. "It means you have to trust me," Robert intervened, addressing the girls for the first time. His voice, normally harsh and authoritarian, sounded strangely soft. "Just this once." Sarah looked at him with distrust. But before she could reply, the courtroom doors opened, and the court clerk called them. The courtroom was smaller than Charles had imagined, but no less intimidating. Judge Miller, a man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and a severe expression, presided from a raised bench. Mr. Brooks presented the case with his characteristic eloquence and precision, detailing the abandonment, the fortuitous encounter, the bond formed between Charles and the girls, and the Native American shoe project that promised economic stability. Miss Davis presented her favorable report, emphasizing the positive environment Charles had created for the girls, despite the spatial limitations of the shop. When it was Charles's turn to speak, he felt the words evaporate in his throat. He looked at the girls sitting in the front row with tense expressions and found his voice. "Your Honor," he began, "I am not rich or young. I don't have a big house, nor can I offer them material luxuries, but I can give them something I've learned is more important: unconditional love, respect for their roots, and the certainty that they will never be alone again." The judge watched him intently, revealing no emotion. "These girls," Charles continued, "have transformed my life. They have given me back a purpose when I believed I had nothing left to offer the world. I know I am not their biological father, but in my heart, they are already my daughters." His voice cracked on the last phrase, and Charles had to pause to regain his composure. In that moment of vulnerability, he felt a small hand slip into his. Holly had gotten up from her seat and was now next to him, offering her silent support. The judge observed the gesture, and for the first time, his expression softened slightly. "Do the children wish to speak?" he asked, addressing the little ones. Sarah was the first to stand, with surprising dignity for her 11 years. She looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor," she said in a clear but emotional voice, "Mr. Smith found us when no one else wanted to see us. He gave us shelter, food, and something more important. He saw us as people, not as a burden. He taught us that we can create beautiful things with our hands, just like Mom used to do." Emily joined her sister. "With him, we learn every day. He teaches me to work with leather like a real artisan, and he never gets mad when I make mistakes. He just shows me how to do it better. And he tells me stories," Holly added innocently, prompting an involuntary smile on the judge's face. When the girls finished, the judge addressed Robert Greene, who had remained unusually silent. "Mr. Greene, you are the biological father. Do you wish to state your position regarding custody? Robert slowly stood up. His posture, normally defiant, now seemed burdened by an invisible weight. Your Honor, he began in a voice Charles had never heard from him. I have made many mistakes in my life. The worst was abandoning my daughters when they needed me most. Absolute silence fell over the room. No one, especially the girls, expected this admission. I don't deserve to call myself their father, Robert continued. A father protects, a father stays. Those were the words my oldest daughter told me, and she was right. He pulled a document from his jacket and handed it to the judge. I have voluntarily signed the relinquishment of my parental rights. I request that custody be granted to Charles Smith, who has proven to be more of a father to them in a few weeks than I have in their entire lives. The judge examined the document with evident surprise, while Charles looked at Robert, unable to believe what he had just heard. Even Mr. Brooks seemed astonished by this unexpected turn. Mr. Green, the judge finally said, do you understand the legal implications of this decision? The relinquishment of parental rights is irreversible. I understand perfectly, Robert replied. Then, looking directly at Sarah, he added, it's the least I can do for them. The judge briefly retired to review the documents. Those minutes felt like an eternity for Charles, who didn't know whether to believe in Robert's sincerity or fear some hidden trap. When the judge returned, his expression was solemn, but less severe. Having reviewed the documentation, the social reports, and heard all parties, including the voluntary relinquishment of the biological father, this court grants temporary custody of minors, Sarah, Emily, and Holly Green to Mr. Charles Smith for an initial period of 6 months. Charles felt his legs give way. He had heard correctly. He had really won custody. However, the judge continued, this custody is conditional on the improvement of the current living conditions. Within a period of no more than 3 months, you must secure adequate housing for the minors, with separate spaces and appropriate conditions for their development. It was a victory with conditions, an enormous challenge for his limited resources. But at that moment, all that mattered was that the girls would stay with him. When they left the courtroom, the little ones threw themselves into his arms, forming a group hug that broke down all the emotional barriers Charles had built since Eleanor's death. Tears, held back for so long, flowed freely down his wrinkled face. Robert observed the scene from a distance, with an indecipherable expression on his face. When Charles finally looked at him, the man nodded slightly. I didn't do it for you, he said, approaching. I did it for them. Thank you, Charles replied sincerely. They will never forget this gesture. I'm not looking for your gratitude or your forgiveness, Robert responded. I just want you to know that in my own way I did the right thing. Finally, he turned to the girls, who were watching him with a mixture of confusion and caution. The deal is still on, he said, addressing Sarah primarily. My lawyer will contact you for the details of the financial agreement. With those words, he turned and walked away down the hallway, a solitary figure carrying the weight of his mistakes, and perhaps the relief of a correct, though belated decision. That night, as the girls slept after a small impromptu celebration thrown by Dolores, Charles faced an overwhelming reality. They had custody, but also a 3-month deadline to find suitable housing. How are we going to do it, Eleanor? He whispered to his wife's photograph. We're just starting with the shoes, and now we need a house. Mr. Brooks had been clear. The judge would keep his word. If the living conditions weren't significantly improved in 3 months, custody could be revoked. The dream of a workshop school that had begun to form in his mind now seemed more urgent, but also more unattainable. They would need much more than the current orders to finance such a project. As he contemplated the finished shoes, ready for the exhibition that was opening in 3 days, Charles felt a contradictory mixture of triumph and fear. They had won a crucial battle, but the war for a stable home was just beginning. The next morning, when the workshop reopened its doors, a surprise awaited Charles. Mr. Johnson, the terminal manager, was in front of the shoe repair shop with an unusually kind expression. Good morning, Smith, he greeted. I heard yesterday was an important day for you and the girls. News travels fast in the terminal, Charles commented, surprised by the manager's interest. Faster than the buses, Johnson confirmed with a smile. I also heard about the deadline the judge gave you to get a more suitable place. Charles nodded, wondering what the man was getting at. You see, Johnson continued, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret, The terminal has an abandoned property in the back. It used to be the old guard's house, but it hasn't been used in years. It needs repairs, of course, but it has 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a small yard. Charles could barely believe what he was hearing. "Are you offering me that house?" "Not exactly offering it," Johnson replied, momentarily returning to his usual business tone. "I propose an arrangement. You keep your shop here, paying normal rent, and the house is included as part of the agreement with a small increase, of course." It was an unexpected opportunity, perhaps the only one they would have. However, Charles knew he had to be cautious. "I'll need to see the property first," he said, "and consult with the girls. We're a family now. We make decisions together." The word family came naturally to his lips, as if it had always been so. "Mr. Johnson nodded with a respect he had never before shown towards the old shoemaker. "I'll take you to see it this afternoon," he offered. "And by the way, those shoes you're making are really special. My wife saw the ones you had on display and hasn't stopped talking about them. Perhaps we could discuss a special order for her birthday." With those words, he departed, leaving Charles stunned by this unexpected turn. It was possible that the same man who had been about to evict him was now offering a solution to his most urgent problem. When he shared the news with the girls, their reactions were diverse. Holly jumped with excitement at the idea of having a yard. Emily asked practical questions about how they would connect the workshop to the house. And Sarah, always cautious, expressed her concern. "What if it's a trap? What if he charges us too much or changes his mind later?" "We'll get everything in writing," Charles replied, understanding her concern. "And Mr. Brooks will review the contract before we sign anything." The possibility of a solution to the housing problem eased some of the pressure, but Charles knew that the most important thing still remained: the success of the exhibition at the gallery, which could determine if the Native American shoe business would be viable in the long term. As the girls excitedly discussed how they would decorate their possible new home, Charles immersed himself in the final details of the 3rd pair of shoes for the exhibition. Every stitch, every detail had to be perfect. The future of his newly formed family depended on it. The day of the exhibition opening at Olivia's gallery had arrived. Charles and the girls proudly contemplated the 3 pairs of shoes perfectly arranged on light wooden pedestals. The women's sandals with the sun symbol, the men's loafers with the sacred deer, and the children's pair decorated with the eyes of God shimmered under the strategically placed lights, highlighting every artisanal detail. "They're beautiful," Emily whispered, adjusting the new dress Olivia had insisted on giving them for the occasion. All 3 girls were radiant, transformed by the combination of the good news about the custody and the excitement of seeing their work displayed in such an elegant space. Charles, dressed in his only suit, now carefully pressed, felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. The gallery was beginning to fill with elegant people, art collectors, cultural journalists, and curious individuals drawn by the promise of something new and authentic. "Ah, Mr. Smith, you look splendid," Olivia greeted him, approaching with a radiant smile. "Are you ready for your big night?" Before he could answer, a photographer approached to capture the image of the creative team next to their creations. Charles, unaccustomed to being the center of attention, felt momentarily overwhelmed, but the presence of the girls by his side gave him the necessary confidence. "The Smith shoes are the result of a unique collaboration," Olivia explained to a group of interested attendees. "The artisanal wisdom of Mr. Charles Smith, a shoemaker with 40 years of experience, combined with the traditional Native American art, transmitted by these talented girls." The story moved everyone, especially when Olivia, with appropriate discretion, mentioned that the young Native American artisans had found in Charles not only a mentor but a new family. To everyone's surprise, Mr. Johnson appeared at the gallery accompanied by his wife, an elegant woman who made no secret of her fascination with the shoes. "Smith," the manager greeted him with a respect he had never before shown. "Your work is exceptional. My wife hasn't stopped talking about the sandals since she saw them in your shop." "All the credit goes to the girls," Charles replied honestly. "I just put my hands and tools at their service." "About the house," Mr. Johnson continued, lowering his voice. "I saw it this afternoon with your lawyer. It needs work, of course, but Child Protective Services would consider it adequate after some basic improvements." Charles nodded, still processing this unexpected opportunity. The old guard's house at the terminal, though abandoned for years, represented the perfect solution, spacious enough for the girls, near the workshop, and with a rent that, combined with the shops, they could manage if the business prospered. "Thank you for the opportunity," Charles said sincerely. "It means a lot to us." "It's a good deal for both of us," Johnson replied pragmatically. "The house has been empty for years, and now I can rent it along with the shop at a reasonable price. Besides," an unusually warm smile spread across his face, "those girls deserve a real home." The evening was a resounding success. Several attendees had expressed interest in acquiring similar pieces, and even a representative from an exclusive boutique in Beverly Hills had requested a meeting to discuss a possible limited line. In a quiet moment, Charles briefly stepped aside for air. So many emotions in so few days had left him exhausted, yet exultant. Suddenly, he felt a presence beside him. "Dr. Jenkins," he greeted, surprised to recognize Dr. Jenkins, elegantly dressed for the occasion. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Olivia is my niece," the doctor explained with a smile. "I wouldn't miss this for anything. Besides, I wanted to congratulate you personally. I heard about the hearing. It was unexpected," Charles confessed, still processing the events of the past few days. "I never imagined Robert would voluntarily relinquish his rights. Sometimes people surprise us," the doctor reflected. "Even themselves." He paused before continuing. "Have you thought about school for the girls?" The judge mentioned that they must be enrolled as a condition. It was a valid concern that Charles had been postponing, overwhelmed by first resolving the housing issue. "My wife was a teacher for 40 years, Dr. Jenkins continued. "As if by the way, she's retired now, but she maintains excellent relationships with several schools. She could help with the paperwork, especially considering the girls' special situation." "I would greatly appreciate that," Charles replied, moved by this new offer of help. As they returned to the main hall, Charles reflected on how, in just a few weeks, his solitary life had transformed into a network of relationships and support. Where before he only had Dolores as a friend, now he had Mr. Brooks, Dr. Jenkins, Olivia, and even Mr. Johnson had gone from adversary to potential ally. The exhibition was a resounding success. Olivia announced that the 3 original pairs had been acquired by a private collector at a price that exceeded the most optimistic expectations. In addition, they had confirmed orders for 10 more pairs, with a substantial advance that would allow them to acquire top-quality materials and begin repairs on the house. That night, as they returned to the terminal in the taxi Olivia had insisted on paying for, the girls dozed, exhausted but happy. Charles observed their faces in the dim light, marveling at the miracle they represented in his life. "What's next, Mr. Smith?" Sarah asked, the only one who remained awake with that maturity that still surprised the shoemaker. "Now, little one, we build a home," he replied softly so as not to wake her sisters. "And then, who knows, maybe a workshop, school where other children learn what you know how to do." Sarah nodded, contemplating the possibility seriously. "Do you think Mom would be proud?" "I'm sure of it," Charles affirmed. "Keeping her legacy alive, honoring her teachings in this way, I can't imagine greater pride for a mother." The girl was silent for a moment, processing his words. "And Eleanor too," she finally said. "She'd be proud of you for not giving up." Charles felt a lump in his throat. That Sarah mentioned Eleanor, that she connected both stories, was an unexpected gift he would cherish forever. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. With the money from the initial sale and the advances on orders, they were able to begin basic repairs on the house. Under Mr. Brooks's supervision, they signed a 2-year lease agreement with Mr. Johnson, combining the shoe repair shop and the guard's house into an arrangement that, while tight, was financially manageable. The house, though deteriorated by neglect, had good bones. 2 spacious rooms that would allow the girls to have their own space, a basic but functional kitchen, a full bathroom, and a small backyard where Holly immediately imagined a flower garden. The girls actively participated in the renovation, choosing colors for the walls, helping to clean, suggesting the arrangement of the few pieces of furniture they acquired. Charles discovered that Sarah had a natural talent for organization, Emily an excellent eye for color and decoration, and Holly an infinite capacity to turn any task into a game that made the work more bearable. Between house repairs and the production of commissioned shoes, They barely had time to rest, but it was a happy, productive tiredness, full of purpose. One afternoon, while they were painting what would be the girls' room, Dolores appeared with surprising news. "Remember my nephew Frank, the one who works at the tannery?" she asked, helping to cover the furniture with protective plastic. "Well, it turns out his boss saw the shoes at the exhibition and was fascinated. He wants to offer you a special arrangement for leathers at a preferential price, in exchange for you mentioning his tannery in your products." It was an invaluable opportunity. Leather represented the largest cost in production, and a preferential price would mean healthier margins or the possibility of creating more elaborate pieces without significantly increasing prices. In addition, Dolores continued, "When I told him about the girls and your idea for a workshop school, he was very interested. He says he could donate scraps and materials for teaching, and even offer internships to more advanced students in the future." Charles was overwhelmed. What had started as a desperate idea to save his failing business was beginning to transform into something much larger, a project with the potential to impact not only his girls' lives, but also other young people interested in preserving traditional crafts. Dr. Jenkins, true to his word, had secured spots for all 3 girls at a school near the terminal. The principal, moved by the story and recognizing the importance of supporting girls of Native American descent, had relaxed some administrative requirements, while Charles, with Mr. Brooks's help, completed the official paperwork. "They'll start next Monday," the doctor informed him, handing Charles the list of necessary school supplies. "The school has a special program for children who need remedial work, so don't worry, they'll be well taken care of." The news generated mixed reactions in the little ones. Holly, extroverted by nature, was excited at the prospect of meeting new friends. Emily showed cautious curiosity, asking how they would balance school with working in the workshop. Sarah, as always, was the most reluctant. "What if they make fun of us?" she asked one night while Charles helped her organize her new notebooks. "For being Native American, for not having normal parents." "First of all," Charles replied, carefully choosing his words, "being Navajo is a source of pride, not something to hide. The art that you and your sisters create comes from that heritage, and it is beautiful." He paused before continuing. "And as for not having normal parents, well, normal is just what's common, not what's best. Our family may be different, but it's real, and it's full of love. That's what matters." Sarah nodded, not entirely convinced, but somewhat comforted. Charles knew the transition wouldn't be easy. The girls had lost months of schooling after their mother's death and the period of instability with their father. Adapting to the school rhythm, making new friends, facing questions about their family situation, these would be significant challenges. But he also knew that these girls had shown extraordinary resilience. They had survived abandonment, transformed their pain into art, and built a new beginning from nothing. School would be another challenge, but one they would face together, like everything else. The weekend before school started, they received an unexpected visit. Olivia arrived at the shoe repair shop with 2 exciting pieces of news. The first was that a journalist from the cultural supplement of a major national newspaper wanted to do a feature story on the Native American Smith shoes for the Sunday edition. The second, even more surprising, was that a cultural foundation had become interested in their idea of the workshop school and wanted to discuss the possibility of seed funding. "A foundation? Funding?" Charles asked, overwhelmed. "But it's barely an idea, we don't even have a formal plan." "Precisely why they want to talk now," Olivia explained. "They're interested in supporting the project from its conception, helping to shape it. They're especially interested in the preservation of traditional indigenous techniques and their contemporary application." "It's exactly what you're doing." As Olivia explained the details, Charles observed the girls. Emily listened with growing attention, clearly visualizing the possibilities. Holly, though she didn't understand all the technical aspects, grasped the general excitement and smiled broadly, but it was Sarah's reaction that moved him most. For the first time since he had known her, Sarah allowed a genuinely hopeful smile to light up her face, not the cautious smile she occasionally showed, but a true expression of joy and possibility. "Could we teach other children what Mom taught us?" she asked, her voice mixing emotion and reverence, "to keep it from getting lost?" "That's exactly the point, Sarah," Olivia confirmed. That your mother's knowledge not only lives on in the three of you but expands, grows, evolves. That night, after Olivia left, the girls couldn't contain their enthusiasm. The prospect of the project had ignited a spark that transcended the shoes and the house. It was the possibility of a greater purpose, of honoring their cultural heritage in a way their mother would have approved. Even Holly, normally oblivious to more complex conversations, grasped the importance of the moment. "Mommy would be happy," she declared with the absolute certainty of children. She always said that beautiful things should be shared. Charles, observing the scene from his small workbench, felt overwhelming gratitude. In just a few weeks his life had gone from resigned solitude to this abundance of purpose and connection. 3 girls who arrived drenched and scared on a stormy night had become the family he never had. And the shoe repair shop that was dying in oblivion was now transforming into the seed of a project with the potential to touch many lives. "What are you thinking about, Mr. Smith?" Emily asked, noticing his contemplative silence. "About the paths of life," he replied honestly, "about how sometimes what seems like a tragedy can be the beginning of something beautiful." The 3 girls nodded, intuitively understanding the depth of his words. They too had experienced how the most painful abandonment had led, through an unexpected path, to a new beginning full of possibilities. As the sun set over the Phoenix bus terminal, painting the sky in golden and purple hues, Charles Smith contemplated the future with a mixture of awe and determination. The challenges remained enormous. Finishing the house, balancing production with growing orders, adapting the girls to school, developing the workshop school project. But for the first time in years, these challenges did not overwhelm him with despair. They were tests to overcome on a path that now had direction and purpose, a path he walked accompanied, not alone. "Tomorrow will be a great day," he said, gathering his tools as the girls organized threads and leathers. "We have a lot of work ahead of us." And as they closed the shoe repair shop to head to their new house, still undergoing renovation, but already imbued with the spirit of home, Charles remembered the words Eleanor used to repeat in difficult times. "Well-made shoes lead to the right places." Perhaps she was right. Perhaps all this time, while repairing other people's shoes, he was really charting his own path to a destiny he never imagined, but now wouldn't change for anything in the world. 3 months had passed since the successful exhibition at the gallery. The guard's house, now transformed into a real home, overflowed with life and color. The walls, once chipped and gray, sported warm tones carefully chosen by the girls. The small backyard flourished with the plants Holly cared for daily. The sisters' shared room was decorated with drawings, photographs, and a miniature display that honored the memory of Maria and Eleanor. That sunny November morning, as they ate breakfast at the table Mr. Brooks had given them, Charles silently observed his family. The girls had adapted surprisingly well to school. Even Sarah, initially so reluctant, had found her place and was beginning to show outstanding academic performance. "Mr. Smith," Emily called, interrupting his thoughts. "Today we go to the meeting with the foundation." "Yes, little one, at 4, he confirmed, feeling a knot of nerves in his stomach. Today was the decisive day for the workshop school project. After weeks of preparation, they would formally present their proposal to the Arizona Cultural Foundation, which could grant them the necessary funding to start. Mr. Brooks had helped with the legal aspects, Olivia with the visual presentation, and the girls had worked tirelessly on samples of their work for the demonstration. "What if they say no?" Sarah asked, vocalizing the fear they all felt. "Then we'll look for another way," Charles replied firmly, "as we always have." Smith's shoes had undergone a complete transformation in these months. It was no longer just a repair shop, but a true artisanal workshop where unique pieces combining traditional craftsmanship with contemporary designs were created. Orders were increasing weekly, and they had hired Leo, a young apprentice, to help with basic work, while Charles and the girls focused on the special designs. The modern footwear representative called again. Sarah commented, who at 11 years old already managed part of the administration with surprising efficiency. Charles frowned. The commercial chain that had originally bought the designs from Robert now wanted to partner with them. Their proposal was tempting: national distribution, increased production, significant economic benefits. but it involved giving up some creative control and turning what was an artisanal process into something more industrialized. "We can talk about that later," he replied, not wanting that topic to overshadow the important day ahead. As they cleared the table, the phone rang. It was Olivia, confirming the final details for the presentation. Her voice sounded tense, which alerted Charles. "Is something wrong?" he asked. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I received a disturbing call," Olivia finally admitted, "from someone at Modern Footwear. They insinuated that they have some kind of legal claim over the Navajo designs you are using." Charles felt his blood run cold. How is that possible? Robert relinquished any claim. Apparently before that, he signed some kind of exclusivity contract with them. I don't have the details, but it sounded serious. The news hit Charles like a punch. Could Robert have sold the exclusive rights to the Navajo designs before giving up his personal claims? All their efforts, all their dreams, would be threatened by a contract they didn't even know about. Could this affect the meeting with the Foundation? He asked, fearing the answer. I don't know, Charles, Olivia replied honestly, but I think we should consult with Mr. Brooks immediately. After hanging up, Charles found himself with 3 pairs of eyes watching him anxiously. What's wrong? Sarah asked, always attentive to unexpressed concerns. Charles briefly considered hiding the truth, protecting them from the new problem, but these girls had proven their strength again and again. They deserved honesty. There might be a problem with the designs, he explained calmly. It seems that Modern Footwear claims some kind of right over them. Emily looked confused. But their designs, they've existed for centuries. No one can own them. It's more complicated than that, little one, Charles replied. It's not about the traditional designs themselves, but their specific application to footwear in the way you do it. Sarah, immediately understanding the implications, clenched her fists. It was Dad, wasn't it? He sold our designs before giving up his rights over us. The question hung in the air as Charles urgently dialed Mr. Brooks's number. The lawyer arrived in less than an hour with a grave expression that confirmed his fears. I've been investigating, he explained, spreading several documents on the table. Indeed, Robert Greene signed an exclusivity contract with Modern Footwear approximately a week before relinquishing his parental rights. He assigned the exclusive use of traditional Navajo artisan designs applied to footwear for a period of 5 years. But how could he do that? Charles asked, indignant. He didn't create those designs. The girls learned them from their mother. Legally, as a father, he could represent the interests of his minor daughters, Mr. Brooks explained. It's ethically questionable, but potentially valid in legal terms. And now what? Sarah's voice trembled slightly, revealing the vulnerable child behind the mature facade. Mr. Brooks took a deep breath. We have 2 options. Fight legally, arguing that the contract is invalid due to prior abandonment and subsequent relinquishment of rights, or try to negotiate. Negotiate? Charles repeated, incredulous. Yes. Offer Modern Footwear some kind of collaboration that allows them to safeguard their investment while you maintain your creative independence. The idea of collaborating with the corporation that had bought the designs behind. The girls' backs was repugnant to Charles. However, a prolonged legal battle could exhaust their resources and, most importantly, destroy the delicate balance they had built in recent months. The meeting with the Foundation is in 3 hours, Emily reminded them. Always practical. What do we do? Mr. Brooks looked at his watch. I suggest we proceed with the presentation. The Foundation should know the situation, but also the real value of your project. Meanwhile, I'll request an urgent meeting with the representatives of Modern Footwear. Every minute until the meeting felt like an eternity. Charles tried to concentrate on the presentation, mentally reviewing the key points, but his mind constantly returned to the legal problem. They were about to lose everything they had fought for. The Arizona Cultural Foundation building was an old, restored colonial mansion in the historic center of Phoenix. Upon entering, Charles and the girls were led to a conference room where 5 people awaited them. 3 members of the evaluation committee, Olivia, and to his absolute surprise, the CEO of Modern Footwear, Mr. William Davis. What's he doing here? Charles whispered to Olivia as they formally greeted those present. I don't know, she replied in a low voice. This wasn't planned. Before they could say more, the president of the foundation, Dr. Ann Carter took the floor. We appreciate your presence. As you know, we are considering supporting your workshop school project for the preservation and evolution of Navajo art applied to contemporary design. She paused significantly. However, we have been informed of certain potential legal conflicts that we must clarify before proceeding. All eyes turned to William Davis, who settled into his seat with the confidence of someone who held all the cards. Mr. Smith, he began with a falsely cordial tone, our company has a legally binding contract that grants us exclusive rights to the designs you are using. We have tried to contact you to resolve this matter amicably, without success. Charles was about to respond when, to everyone's surprise, Sarah stood up. With all due respect, sir, she said with surprising dignity for her age, these designs are not simply designs, they are part of our Navajo cultural heritage, passed down through generations that our mother taught us before she died. Davis seemed momentarily disconcerted by the girl's eloquence, but quickly regained his composure. I understand the sentimental value, little one, but business is business. Your father sold us the rights legally. A father who abandoned us, Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength, who left us alone in a bus terminal and then tried to profit from our work when he saw it had commercial value. The room fell silent. Even the committee members seemed impacted by the story. Emily joined her sister. The symbols we use are not just pretty drawings. Each one has a spiritual meaning for the Navajo people. The eye of God protects, the deer guides, the sun gives life, Emily explained. And when Mom taught them to us, Holly added with her sweet, clear voice, pointing to a sun symbol on a shoe, she told us they were gifts, pretty pictures to share with everyone. Dr. Carter observed the exchange with evident interest. Mr. Davis, did your company consider the cultural significance of these symbols, or did you simply see a commercial opportunity? The businessman shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Our interest is legitimate. We are promoting American art, giving it international visibility. Visibility or exploitation? Mr. Brooks's question, who had remained silent until then, fell like a bomb in the room. Charles, observing the dynamic, understood that this was the decisive moment. It was not just about legal rights, but about something much deeper, the right of these girls to honor their heritage and define their own future. Mr. Davis, he finally said, we are not here to start a legal battle, although we are willing to defend ourselves if necessary. We are here because we believe that this knowledge must be preserved and transmitted respectfully. He approached the table where they had displayed some samples of their work. What we do is not simply apply drawings to shoes. Each piece tells a story, preserves a tradition, honors a culture that has survived centuries of adversity. He picked up one of the most recent pairs, boots with the symbol of the two-headed eagle, representing the vision of the future and the past simultaneously. You see this? It's not just a decorative pattern, it's a symbol of ancestral wisdom. When Emily embroiders it, she recites the teachings her mother passed on to her. When Sarah chooses the colors, she remembers the meaning of each shade. And when Holly helps with the finishes, she sings the traditional songs she heard from the cradle. The passion in his voice was palpable, visibly moving several people present. What we propose with this workshop school is not just a business. It is a space where this knowledge can stay alive, where Indigenous and non-Indigenous children learn together, where the traditional and the contemporary engage in respectful dialogue. William Davis, visibly uncomfortable, tried to regain control of the situation. All that sounds very noble, Mr. Smith, but the legal rights are clearly established in our contract. A possibly flawed contract, Mr. Brooks intervened, signed by someone who soon after formally relinquished his parental rights, admitting to having abandoned his daughters. A contract that exploits ancestral knowledge for purely commercial purposes. The tension in the room was palpable. Dr. Carter again took the floor. And I believe we are facing a dilemma that transcends purely legal matters. This case touches on fundamental questions about the protection of Indigenous cultural heritage and the rights of communities over their traditional knowledge. She looked directly at Davis. Sir, your company could find itself embroiled in significant controversy if this becomes public. Cultural appropriation is an extremely sensitive issue in our day. The businessman seemed to consider for the first time the broader implications of the conflict. It was no longer just a dispute over intellectual property rights, but a potential public relations disaster. Perhaps, Dr. Carter continued, instead of a confrontation, we could consider a collaboration that truly respects the origins and meanings of these design zones, where the community, represented in this case by these girls and their legal guardian, maintains control over the use of their traditional knowledge. Emily, always the natural mediator, stepped forward. Mr. Davis, we are not opposed to more people knowing and appreciating Navajo art. What we want is for its meaning to be respected and for our community to benefit from it. Something in the girl's sincerity seemed to touch a nerve in the businessman. For the first time since the beginning of the meeting, his expression softened slightly. What exactly do you propose? Charles looked at Mr. Brooks, who nodded encouragingly. A real collaboration, Charles proposed. Your company can distribute our designs, but under specific conditions: respect for traditional meanings, explicit recognition of the origins, participation in creative decisions, and a percentage of the profits destined for the workshop school and development projects in Navajo communities. In addition, Sarah added, we want each piece to include information about its cultural meaning. They are not just pretty shoes, they carry stories. Davis seemed to mentally calculate the costs and benefits of the proposal. After a moment of reflection, he spoke in a noticeably more conciliatory tone. It could work. Our marketing department has already noticed that customers value authenticity and the stories behind products. This approach could even increase commercial appeal. Dr. Carter smiled, visibly pleased with the turn of events. It seems we are moving towards a constructive solution. If both parties are willing to formalize this collaboration, the Foundation would be interested in supporting not only the workshop school, but also the creation of a framework for future collaborations between companies and indigenous communities. Charles could barely believe what was happening. What had started as a potential catastrophe was transforming into an unprecedented opportunity. Not only would they maintain control over their designs, but they would now have the backing of both an established company and a respected cultural foundation. There's one more detail, Davis added, regaining some of his negotiating demeanor. We will need exclusivity for large-scale commercial distribution, as long as that doesn't limit our artisanal production in the workshop or our educational projects, Charles replied firmly. That's acceptable, the businessman conceded. We can clearly define the scope of each party's activities. As the adults began to discuss the preliminary details of the agreement, Sarah discreetly approached her sisters. Do you think it will work? She whispered. It has to work, Emily replied with determination. It's the only way to ensure that Mom's knowledge stays alive and respected. Holly, with the innocent wisdom of children, added, and that way many people can have a piece of our history on their feet. Charles watched the girls, his heart full of pride. In the midst of this complex negotiation, they maintained clarity about what was truly important, preserving and honoring their mother's legacy, their culture, their identity. When the meeting finally concluded, 3 preliminary agreements had been established: collaboration with modern footwear, under respectful terms, financial support from the Foundation for the workshop, school, and a joint commitment to develop a model of ethical collaboration with indigenous communities that could be replicated in other contexts. As they left the building under the warm Phoenix sun, Charles felt an enormous weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't a perfect ending. Real life rarely offers those. But it was a new beginning full of possibilities. Do you know what just happened? He asked the girls as they walked to the bus stop. We won, Holly ventured with childlike optimism. In a way, yes, Charles replied, smiling. But more importantly, we showed that there are ways to move forward without losing who we are, without betraying our roots. Sarah, walking thoughtfully beside him, finally spoke. Mr. Smith, do you think someday we can go to the Navajo Nation to learn more about where we come from? The question caught Charles by surprise, but he immediately knew the answer. Of course, Sarah. It's part of who you are, of your history, and now with the workshop school, perhaps we can even build bridges between the city and the traditional communities. As the bus approached, Emily took Charles's hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. Thank you, she said simply, for fighting with us. No, little one, he replied, moved. Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to start over, to find a new family, a new purpose. The bus stopped in front of them, opening its doors as an invitation to continue the journey that had begun at that same terminal on a rainy night that now seemed so distant and that had, nonetheless, changed their lives forever. A year had passed since that decisive meeting at the Arizona Cultural Foundation. Smith's Shoes, now rebranded as Smith's Shoes, Walking Stories, had completely transformed. What was once a small repair shop at the bus terminal was now a spacious and bright space combining a workshop, a store, and a classroom for evening classes. That sunny November morning, Charles contemplated with satisfaction the bustle animating the place. In one corner, Emily, barely 9 years old, patiently guided 2 apprentices in the basic techniques of Navajo embroidery. Her natural talent for teaching surprised even the art teacher who supervised the formal classes. Near the window, Sarah, now 12, seriously discussed new designs for the spring collection with a representative from Modern Footwear. The collaboration negotiated that day at the foundation had proven surprisingly fruitful. The company gained exclusivity in large-scale commercial distribution, while the shoe repair shop maintained total creative control and independent artisanal production. Each pair of industrially produced shoes included the design's story, and a percentage of sales was allocated to both the workshop, school, and development projects in Navajo communities. Holly, with her 5 years and inexhaustible energy, ran among the customers, proudly showing off the small medicinal plant garden she had established in the backyard, guided by the knowledge doctor. Jenkins' wife patiently transmitted to her each week. "Mr. Smith," Dolores called, now the official administrator of the shop, while he focused on the creative and educational aspects. "The guests are starting to arrive." Charles nodded, nervously adjusting his tie. Today was no ordinary day. The Maria Green Workshop School, funded by the Arizona Foundation and supported by various local businesses, was officially inaugurating its facilities in the space adjacent to the shoe repair shop, recently acquired thanks to the business's success. The inauguration ceremony would bring together all the people who had made this dream possible, from Olivia and Mr. Say, Refund of Arsing Brooks to officials from the National Commission for Indigenous Peoples Development, representatives of Modern Footwear, and most importantly, the first 15 scholarship students, children and adolescents of Navajo descent, who would learn both traditional techniques and their contemporary application. Among the attendees, Charles recognized a figure he didn't expect to see. Robert Green, sober and formally dressed, discreetly stood in a corner of the premises. After the agreement with Modern Footwear, they had had minimal contact with him. He punctually fulfilled his commitment not to interfere in the girls' lives in exchange for the agreed percentage on the sales of the original designs. Sarah had also seen him. Her eyes, now much more serene than when he first met her, briefly met those of her biological father. There was no hostility in her gaze, but neither was there the warmth she reserved for her chosen family. With an almost imperceptible gesture of recognition, she continued her conversation with the commercial representative. "Are you okay?" Charles asked discreetly when he could approach her. "Yes," she replied with the maturity that had always characterized her. "It's strange to see him here, but it doesn't hurt like before." Charles gently squeezed her shoulder in a gesture of silent support. Sarah's emotional evolution had been one of the most beautiful miracles to witness this year. From the distrustful and wounded girl, he found that rainy night to this confident and compassionate teenager who now showed Native American designs to international artisans with the confidence of someone who knows the value of her heritage. Dr. Jenkins approached them, accompanied by his wife, Miss Teresa Jenkins, who had become a vital maternal figure for the girls, helping them with schoolwork and teaching them domestic skills that complemented their artistic education. "Ready for the big moment?" the doctor asked with a smile. "Nervous," Charles admitted. "I never imagined being at the helm of something like this. And yet here you are," Teresa replied, "because when the heart finds its purpose, the feet know where to walk." The inaugural ceremony began punctually. Dr. Carter, president of the foundation, spoke eloquently about the importance of preserving indigenous cultural heritage while allowing its natural evolution. Mr. L.S. Johnson, who surprisingly had become one of the project's most enthusiastic advocates, highlighted the positive impact on the terminal community, once seen as a mere transit point, now a cultural destination in itself. When it was Charles's turn to speak, he felt a lump in his throat. In front of him were all the people who had made this miracle possible, and by his side, the 3 girls who had transformed his life in ways he never thought possible. Just over a year ago, he began, I was a lonely old shoemaker on the verge of losing everything. My business was dying. My purpose had vanished with my wife Eleanor's departure, and the future seemed as grey as a stormy night. He paused, searching for the right words. And then, literally on a stormy night, 3 little angels appeared behind some boxes in the terminal. An emotional murmur ran through the audience as glances turned to the girls, who stood next to Charles with a mixture of pride and shyness. What began as a simple act of humanity transformed into the greatest gift life could offer me: a new family, a new purpose, a second chance. His voice cracked slightly. These girls not only brought their talent and ancestral knowledge, they brought light to my darkness, hope to my despair, love to my loneliness. Emily discreetly took his hand, giving him strength to continue. The Maria Green Workshop School, named in honor of the brave Navajo mother who passed on this knowledge to her daughters before she left, is born from the conviction that the most valuable traditions are not those that are preserved motionless in museums, but those that are kept alive by adapting to new times and circumstances. With a gesture, he invited the girls to join his speech. Sarah, taking the microphone with surprising composure, spoke briefly about the project's vision, a space where young Indigenous people could learn and teach simultaneously, keeping their ancestors' cultural legacy alive while finding contemporary ways to express it. Emily described the educational programs they had designed, combining traditional techniques with modern applications, always respecting the original spiritual meanings of each symbol and pattern. And finally, Holly, with the candid simplicity of her 5 years, summarized everything in a sentence that brought smiles and some tears to the attendees. Here, they make shoes that tell stories and people who change lives. As the formal ceremony concluded, and guests enjoyed a small reception, Charles noticed Robert cautiously approaching where the girls were conversing with other students. For a moment he feared an awkward situation, but then he saw something that reassured him. Sarah had seen him too, and after a moment's hesitation, she subtly gestured for him to come closer. It wasn't an emotional reunion or a dramatic reconciliation, simply a brief exchange where Robert, visibly nervous, congratulated his daughters on their achievements. Emily responded with polite courtesy, Holly with her usual childlike curiosity, and Sarah with a maturity that transcended her age. "This place is impressive," Robert commented, clearly searching for the right words. "Your mother would be very proud." "We know," Sarah replied with serene confidence. "We feel her presence here every day, guiding us." When Robert said goodbye, discreetly promising not to interfere but expressing his desire to hear from them occasionally, Charles approached Sarah. "All good?" he asked softly. The girl nodded. "I don't hate him, you know. Not anymore. I understand that some people just aren't prepared to be parents." She looked directly into Charles's eyes. "And that others, who never planned to be, turn out to be exactly what we needed." The words deeply touched Charles, who had to make an effort to hold back his emotion. Since that day at the foundation, when they faced the crisis over the design rights together, something fundamental had changed in his relationship with the girls. They were no longer simply an old shoemaker and 3 orphans united by circumstances. They were a true family forged in adversity, strengthened by love. Temporary custody had become permanent legal adoption just 2 months ago, after a long but successful process facilitated by Mr. Brooks. Now they were officially the Smith-Green family, honoring both their adoptive father's surname and the maternal legacy they carried in their blood and in their talents. As the afternoon progressed and guests began to leave, Charles found himself momentarily alone, observing the newly installed mural on the main wall of the workshop school. It was a vibrant representation of the Navajo Eye of God, the symbol of divine protection, surrounded by the names of all the people who had contributed to making this dream a reality. Olivia, Mr. Brooks, Dr. Jenkins and his wife Dolores, even Mr. Johnson. And in the center of the mural, painted with delicate strokes, 2 special names, Eleanor Smith and Maria Green, the 2 women whose love continued to resonate in every stitch, in every design, in every lesson taught in this space. "What are you thinking about?" Dolores asked, approaching with her usual frankness. "About the unexpected paths of life," Charles replied honestly, "about how sometimes the greatest blessings arrive disguised as tragedies." Dolores nodded, also contemplating the mural. "You know, when Eleanor was alive, she always said your hands had magic, that you could fix anything broken. I don't think she was just talking about shoes." Charles smiled, feeling a deep peace. "Perhaps we were all broken in some way, the girls by their loss and abandonment, I by my solitude, and together we found a way to mend each other." The celebration concluded at sunset. As they closed the doors of the workshop school, Charles and the girls walked the few feet that separated it from their home, the old guard's house, now completely renovated and full of life. In the small backyard, Emily had insisted on planting a small Joshua tree the day they received legal adoption. "So our ancestors always find their way home," she had explained. Now its bright yellow flowers shone under the last lights of the day, like little terrestrial stars. As they prepared dinner together, as was their custom every night, Charles watched the girls with an overflowing heart. Sarah efficiently directed the table setting. Emily creatively experimented with the ingredients, and Holly decorated napkins with her colorful drawings. "You know something?" he said suddenly, causing the three of them to look at him with curiosity. "A year ago, when I found you in that terminal, I thought I was saving you." He smiled, feeling emotion welling up in his throat. "Now I understand that it was you who saved me." Sarah put down the plates she was arranging and came to hug him, immediately followed by her sisters. They remained there for a moment, a perfect circle of intertwined arms, of hearts that had found their home. That night, as the girls slept, Charles went out to the small backyard. The starry sky over Phoenix shone with unusual clarity. Next to the Joshua tree was a small permanent display with photographs of Eleanor and Maria. He lit a candle and sat on the wooden bench he had carved himself. "We did it, Eleanor," he whispered to the night. "Those children we wanted so much arrived in the most unexpected way, and they are perfect." A gentle breeze rustled the yellow flowers, spreading their sweet aroma in the night air. Charles closed his eyes, feeling a deep peace. The path had been long and full of obstacles, but every step, every challenge, had led them exactly where they needed to be. At Smith's Shoes, now transformed into Smith's Shoes, walking stories, he had learned that the most beautiful stories are those that cannot be predicted, that the strongest bonds are not always those of blood, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply being present when someone needs it. And as the night embraced Phoenix with its starry mantle, in a small house next to the bus terminal, 4 hearts beat in unison, united by something much more powerful than destiny. The conscious choice to walk together, to be family, to build a home where before there had only been loneliness. Because in the end, as Eleanor used to say, well-made shoes always lead to the right places. And Charles Smith's had led him, step by step, to the most beautiful place of all, a place called home. In this story of Mr. Smith and the 3 girls, we've seen how the most unexpected encounters can transform entire lives. One rainy night, an act of kindness, and 4 lonely souls found in adversity a new opportunity to heal, grow, and build something beautiful together. As Mr. Smith, Sarah, Emily, and Holly taught us, family isn't always about blood, it's about heart. Sometimes the greatest blessings arrive disguised as problems, and there is always hope, even in the darkest moments. This story reminds us that we are all in some way a little broken, but also that together we can mend ourselves and create something more beautiful and stronger than before. That it's never too late for a new beginning, and that true love has many forms, all of them powerful and transformative. Charles Smith, once a solitary and desperate man, found life's meaning through the love and resilience of 3 abandoned little girls. He learned that family is not just about blood, but also about choice, care, and unspoken commitments. Through his challenging journey, he proved that age is not a barrier when your heart is expansive enough to love and protect. Charles's story is a vivid testament that even when life seems to have closed its doors, a new beginning always awaits. Never lose hope, for, as Charles realized, the greatest blessings sometimes arrive disguised as adversity. Open your heart and trust in the unexpected gifts that life brings. To ensure you don't miss out on inspiring stories and profound life lessons like this, subscribe to our channel today.